Chapter 1267. The elevator stopped on the first floor, and a gentle and subtle fragrance floated in the elevator. Li Quanta followed two female staff out of the elevator and came to the hall on the first floor of the castle again. The hall was not busy, but it was not cold either. From time to time, people passed by Li Quanta, looking calm, confident, and peaceful. It was not an exaggeration to say that the structure of Emperor Dong's palace was magnificent. This castle was the heart of Emperor Dong's palace, which involved many aspects, such as the close connection with Xianyuan City, the various plans of countless subordinate enterprises of the Flourishing Age Fund, the transmission and collection of intelligence, the maintenance of network security, the transfer of massive funds, the expansion of Emperor Dong's palace in various fields, the distribution of armaments, a large number of private transactions, and so on. Everything would converge here and then spread out from here. So the huge castle was not cold at all. It was more than the family assets he brought from the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy when the East Emperor Palace was established. After the Flourishing Age Fund joined, it also became the headquarters of the Flourishing Age Fund. A large number of elites and managers filled the office space here. The whole castle, except for the top floor where he lived, was full of vitality every moment. Li Quanta watched quietly, observing every detail around him until an apology came from behind him. "General, sorry to keep you waiting." Xiao Mahai, the current chief steward of Emperor Dong's palace, hurried over with a subtle smile. "Fortunately, I haven't seen this scene for a long time. It's quite interesting." Li Quanta laughed. "What did you call me?" "General, according to the information I have, you will be the commander of the Purgatory Legion in the future. The commanders of the 5 legions, Nightmare, Snow Dance, Kunlun, Purgatory, and Samsara, all have the rank of commander. The special warfare system can accommodate 5 marshals." Xiao Mahai looked around and suddenly said, "What's so interesting about this scene?" Li Quanta was silent for a while, as if he was accepting Xiao Mahai's message. After 10 seconds, he said lightly, "It's like a brothel. Isn't that interesting enough?" Xiao Mahai narrowed his eyes slightly. "Sorry, that's not the right word. This is more like a clubhouse to please only one person." Li Quanta corrected his wording. The people working in the castle could be said to be the civil servants of Emperor Dong's palace. It could be said that there were no men, but relatively speaking, the proportion of women was higher. Among the women, the proportion of young women was also very high, but among the young women, unmarried and single women occupied the majority. The basic framework of the establishment of the East Emperor Palace was the young graduates of the 2 academies. Naturally, they were not very old. Inside the Flourishing Age Fund, the older ones were either eliminated or had reached a more important position and were placed in various leadership levels of the Flourishing Age Fund. Only a few followed Han Donglu. Therefore, the interior of the castle of the East Emperor Palace could be said to be a beautiful scenery. Young and beautiful women could be seen everywhere. It was not strange at all to see black silk and beautiful legs and professional clothes everywhere. "A mist." Xiao Mahai shook his head. Li Quanta looked at him. "What you see is just the workplace etiquette of modern women. You and I are not at the same level. It's hard for me to explain this to you, so I won't say it. I can only say that the general has been dormant in East Island for many years. His temperament is first class, but his vision is inevitably a little short-sighted. His mind, it seems, has been influenced by some culture of East Island and become a little biased." Xiao Mahai said blandly. "I got it. You mean I'm not knowledgeable?" Li Quanta laughed. For so many years, he had heard a lot of ridicule, but Xiao Mahai was really the first one he had seen. Listen what the other party said. "You and I are not at the same level. He used to be the young master of the Li family, the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou State, and the current helmsman of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. His opponents were Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, and Li Huacheng, who really stood at the top of the world and held the strongest power. But now, a butler of Emperor Dong's palace, to put it bluntly, was a dog at Li Tianlan's feet, and he was saying that he was not at the same level as him. The other party's indifferent and condescending tone made Li Quantu not have to worry about who was higher and who was lower. He was saying that he was not knowledgeable. That tone was completely like telling him that he was just a bumpkin who had not seen much of the world. Since when could a butler of Emperor Dong's palace look down on him? Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong, Lin Fengting, Li Huacheng. These were the opponents in his mind. Was it just because he had always felt good about himself? A butler, a lackey. Li Quantu was still laughing, but his eyes became slightly distorted. General, you misunderstood me. I'm not just saying that you are not knowledgeable. Xiao Mahai shook his head and said, when you leave Emperor Dong's palace, I think you should walk around more and don't rush back to the purgatory of Heaven Capital. After staying in a small workshop for a long time, it is inevitable that you will feel that the small workshop is the whole world. You should go to those big enterprises and walk around seriously. The same silk stockings, skirts, high-heeled shoes, and the same delicate and reserved makeup. You can look at those places and see if there are also the clubs and brothels in your eyes. This is life and reality, not those small movies produced in East Island. You can't think that they are that kind of profession just because you have seen those clothes in the movies and see them in reality. I even think that you have already imagined something in your mind. This is not only being ignorant, but also being cheap and nasty. TSK, I shouldn't have said this to you. It's hard for people with these dirty thoughts to understand what I said, isn't it? His voice was indifferent and casual. In fact, he didn't want to say this, but Li Quantu didn't know what was good for him and took the initiative to pick a fight. He said that this place was like a brothel, like some bullshit club, which was a direct insult to Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan. As a butler, Xiao Mahai naturally wouldn't tolerate his bad habits. Li Quantu didn't know what was good for him, so he naturally didn't have to show any mercy. What former young master of the Li family? What dominator of the purgatory of Heaven Capital? You have put your face in front of me, and I am embarrassed not to slap you. Li Quantu listened quietly. The smile on his face became more and more exaggerated, but the light in his eyes became more and more ferocious and cold. A touch of killing intent enveloped Xiao Mahai, and Li Quantu's voice became a little feminine. You are very bold. It's not that I'm bold. Xiao Mahai sighed and said, General, you still don't understand. I really look down on you from the bottom of my heart. I don't even have the idea of deliberately humiliating you. It's not necessary, and it's not worth it. I can say this because I'm speaking from the bottom of my heart. If you have any misunderstanding, it has nothing to do with me. Li Quantu's pupils suddenly contracted, as if he had been stimulated by something. His state of mind was actually good, and his willpower was extremely firm. As Xianyuan Wushang once said, now his combat capability all came from the spiritual field. Such a person's willpower could be said to be the most unbreakable place. If it was in normal times, he naturally would not care about the opinion of a mere housekeeper, but no one could understand how sensitive he was now. He was imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace as a defeated opponent. It seemed that he was eating and drinking well, but for countless days and nights, the situation here made Li Quantu feel that he was a complete loser, even a waste. He did not feel that he was invincible in the world. But in this world, the most intolerable thing for him was to be defeated by Li Tianlan. This was his inner obsession. The failure this time constantly made him feel as if all the hard work he had put in over the years before had been negated at every moment. This feeling came from the purgatory of Heaven Capital, when Li Honghe appointed Li Tianlan to inherit the Li family, which made Li Quantu angry. It came from the unwillingness to guard the dragon vein of Zhongzhou State, but could not get it. It came from the anger of many old people of the Li family who had supported him without complaint or regret and were even willing to die for him. But now they gradually drifted away from him and even stood by Li Tianlan. It came from the anger of Situ, Xingyue, and Li Shi, who were originally his women, but joined the coldness of Emperor Dong's palace. It came from the luxury of besieging Li Tianlan, but facing that sword, they were so small. It came from the powerlessness of being imprisoned in Emperor Dong's palace. It came from the jealousy of Emperor Dong's palace, which was like the sun at high noon. In many aspects, there are many scenes. Great pressure had been pressing on Li Kuang-tu, but he held on, gritted his teeth, and persisted, year after year, day after day. Finally, today, after a short period of imprisonment, he had regained his freedom. Li Tianlan let him go. To some extent, it could even be said that Li Tianlan had given up on him. What kind of threat and trouble he would cause to Li Tianlan in the future, and the harm of letting the tiger return to the mountain. He believed that Li Tianlan knew these. But Li Tianlan, he didn't care. Wasn't this also a kind of disregard? Li Kuang-tu forced himself to smile, but the gloom in his heart had long been real. And now, understatement, calm, natural Xiao Mahai, a butler, a servant, a lackey, with an indifferent attitude, told him very clearly, I just looked down on you. This was like a knife from head to toe, cutting him black and blue all over. If even a butler looked down on you, what qualifications do you have to be Li Tianlan's opponent? That was what Xiao Mahai meant. Li Kuang-tu tried hard to calm his mind, but his breathing still became rapid. Aren't you afraid that I'll kill you? His voice was cold and fierce. I'm just telling the truth. Why do you want to kill me, General? Xiao Mahai's smile was impeccable, very polite, and very implicit. Since it has come to this, I don't want to say anything false. General, you can kill me, but do you dare to? I'm the butler of Emperor Dong's palace, and I'm His Majesty's lackey. If you dare to attack me today, His Majesty will naturally not let you live. So, how can your ridiculous ambition be realized? Li Kuang-tu became more and more angry, but for the first time, he began to look at the butler of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai. He had heard of this person. He used to be a general of Zhongzhou State. It was not easy for him to have a gold star on his shoulder without any background or backing. In terms of ability, Xiao Mahai also had it, but after blocking others' way, he could only be sent to the desert prison. After Li Tianlan went to the desert prison, all forces attached great importance to it. Of course, including Li Kuang-tu and Xiao Mahai. It was also because of Li Tianlan that he officially entered the attention of all the big shots. They knew Xiao Mahai before, but they just knew that there was such a person. But after he clung to Li Tianlan's leg, a series of actions really made people pay attention to this lackey of Dongwang. For more than 2 years, this person really treated Li Tianlan as an ancestor and served him. How special was the status of the desert prison? But he squandered all the funds of the desert prison without being greedy, just to let Li Tianlan enjoy life better. He even sent his daughter and sister there. This kind of thing was really not something that anyone could do. Therefore, numerous people in Yuzhou province were full of resentment towards him. They said that he was like a mangy dog who only wagged its tail at his master, that he was shameless, that he had lost the dignity of a soldier, and that he had even said more outrageous words. But the big shots who really stood at the top of the parliament had been silent about this. In the end, Li Tianlan successfully walked out of the desert prison. Xiao Mahai, who was seriously injured and dying under the torture of Gu Qianchuan, was also brought to Tian'an by him. Li Tianlan soared to the sky. Emperor Dong's palace began to transform. After recovering from his injury, Xiao Mahai became the butler of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan put him in this position, which had fully explained his attitude. It showed that in more than 2 years in the desert, he was extremely satisfied and trusted Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai submitted his resignation to the army ministry. But so far, the army ministry had only taken away his identity as the prison governor of the desert prison. His military rank had always been retained. In other words, if Li Tianlan was short of people, or Xiao Mahai was willing to leave Emperor Dong's palace, he could become one of the most powerful generals in the whole Zhongzhou state in the blink of an eye. He was now the butler of Emperor Dong's palace. Most of those who had scolded and ridiculed him in the past could only bow and talk to him with a smile in front of him now. As for those who could look down on Xiao Mahai now, no one would look down on him. Li Kuang-tu did not look down on him. In Li Kuang-tu's eyes, Xiao Mahai was a madman or a gambler. A person who was willing to abandon all this so-called stability in order to grasp a glimmer of hope. He was resolute, firm, and unwavering. Wasn't this a kind of courage? He did not look down on him, but he did not take it seriously after all. So he said in front of Xiao Mahai, the butler of Emperor Dong's palace, that Emperor Dong's palace was like a brothel. In fact, he wanted to say more than that. He had a lot of ugly words. It was true that he couldn't do anything to Li Tianlan now. But after being locked up for so long, it would be interesting to taunt Li Tianlan in Emperor Dong's palace before he left to vent his resentment. It would be interesting to see the chief steward of Emperor Dong's palace swallow his anger in front of him. Yes, Li Qiangtu was angry. It did not matter whether it was childish or not. During this time, his living conditions were okay, but he felt uncomfortable, so he wanted to make Li Tianlan and Emperor Dong's palace uncomfortable. So he prepared a lot of words. If Emperor Dong's palace was like a brothel and could not provoke Emperor Dong's anger, then he had more lines. But he really did not expect this situation to happen. Swallow his anger? Be angry but dare not speak up? Xiao Mahai laughed. The butler did not hesitate at all. As soon as he started, Li Tianlan had already bitten him without hesitation. There was no scruple, no fear. It was a completely, if you dare to provoke me, I will bite you to death, go to hell. He had expected her to swallow her anger and not dare to say anything. Instead, she was sarcastic, condescending, and speaking the truth. She was arrogant and looked down on him. She was arrogant and looked down on him. She was arrogant and looked down on him. Li Qiangtu felt that he should not be angry. He did not want to be angry, but he was really disgusted by Xiao Mahai, who originally wanted to discuss Li Tianlan. The other party's words sounded calm, but there were always one or two words that were extremely sharp and piercing straight into his chest. Ridiculous ambition. How ridiculous was that? His ambition was to reintegrate the Li family, to annex the current Emperor Dong's palace, to break through the current boundaries, and to be supreme in personal combat capability. When the Li family recovered to its peak, he would completely annex the Wang family of Beihai and establish a dynasty belonging to the Li family. His words carried weight, and he was the only one. He used to be very close to this dream. But after a case of treason, all this began to start from the beginning. However, Li Qiangtu had never given up. He was extremely persistent in pursuing his ambition, and it could even be said that he was struggling for his dream. And all this, in Xiao Mahai's eyes, was ridiculous? It was no longer a mockery. It was an insult. It was a blatant insult to his ambition, his dream, his desire, and even the meaning of his life. Li Qiangtu was so angry that he laughed. You say my ambition is ridiculous? It's really ridiculous. Xiao Mahai still had that damn expression, that polite smile that no one could find any fault with, like a mask. In my opinion, General is the most incompetent man, and you are selfish, naive, and ignorant. I know your identity. You are of noble birth, and you used to enjoy endless resources. Senior Li used to support you. It's a pity that you failed to live up to expectations. Who can you blame? You clearly know that the Li family is the best in the hands of His Majesty, but you are not convinced and always want to fight. Pride, bigotry. It seems to be a reason, but in the end, it's just that you use the inheritance of your ancestors to fulfill your ridiculous dignity. You have ambition, but you really don't have strength. You know this yourself. What does this mean? To put it bluntly, you know that you're not as good as others, but you still want to squander and do something, but you achieve nothing. You fight with His Majesty, and the whole world is watching. But the ridiculous thing is that most of your reliance now is just what Senior Li intends to leave to His Majesty. General, what do you have? You have nothing, but you still want to make a comeback all day long. You're like a country monkey jumping up and down. In the eyes of others, you have long become a joke, but you don't know it. No, maybe you know it and even feel complacent. You want to kill His Majesty, but you know that no matter how much you make trouble, His Majesty doesn't want to kill you. Is this where your confidence comes from? His Majesty has brought you back to this point in order to calm you down. Don't you have the slightest clue as to why exactly? No, you do have an idea, but you deliberately pretend not to see it because you know that His Majesty doesn't want to kill you. As long as he doesn't kill you, you can go out and continue to jump up and down like a monkey to perform your jokes. Am I right? It's just different, General, it's different. You and Li family have a good relationship, but no relationship can withstand the consumption. This time, His Majesty can spare your life. If you continue to make trouble, His Majesty won't kill you. Do you really think that Emperor Dawn's palace won't be angry? I am the director of Emperor Dawn's palace. But to a certain extent, I can represent Emperor Dawn's palace. I can say it here today. Today, when you go out of this door, Emperor Dawn's palace will break with the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future. Since you are enemies, why bother? If His Majesty doesn't want to kill you, do you really think that we can't touch your small workshop? It's ridiculous. I am His Majesty's dog, not the Leaf family's dog. I am the director of Emperor Dawn's palace. How deep do you expect me to feel for the Leaf family? I respect the elders of the Leaf family who are now in the camp of Emperor Dawn's palace. But for those who don't know what's good for them and don't want to come back, I can't wait for them to die with you. To be honest, I'm looking forward to this day. I'm looking forward to you bringing the so-called elites of the Leaf family to die one by one. I'm looking forward to you killing the last bit of the Leaf family's power. You have no other skills, but on this matter, General, I believe in you. Look into my eyes. You can do it. You can do it. In the case of treason more than 20 years ago, you made the Leaf family fall from the peak to the dust, but you didn't completely kill the Leaf family. It's a pity, isn't it? So after so many years, since the Leaf family didn't die, you have to continue to work hard and come again, right? In fact, I can roughly understand what you mean today. You said that Emperor Dawn's palace is like a brothel, but it shouldn't be all, right? There are more unpleasant things to say next. You can continue to say them, and I'll listen to them as entertainment. If you feel that the audience is not enough, I can make all the people who are not involved anxious and watch you make a fool of yourself. No. I mean watch you perform. What do you think? Didn't my reaction surprise you as well? Haha. Do you think that I'm just a butler and you can disgust Emperor Dawn's palace? But this is between you and His Majesty. Without His Majesty's order, I dare not say anything, can only swallow my anger, and can only be angry with you without saying anything. Why? Because you used to be the young master of the Leaf family? Because you are the nominal father of His Majesty? Because you are an old member of the Leaf family. So I want to see you find fault here, and I need you to give me some advice and then disgust His Majesty? You really forget your identity. You are a captive. Let me put it bluntly. Who do you think you are to give advice to Emperor Dawn's palace? What qualifications do you have? You can live now because of His Majesty's mercy. If he wanted to kill you, your body would be rotten now. Don't you know what's going on? How dare you provoke Emperor Dawn's palace, just because you think His Majesty won't kill you? I haven't seen many people like you in my life. You are incompetent, immoral, ignorant, disloyal, unfilial, and unkind, but you still feel good about yourself, paranoid, and proud. You are so hypocritical and disgusting. Voice by voice, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, the mask on Xiao Mahai's face never fell. From beginning to end, he maintained that courteous and reserved smile on his face. He did not bat an eyelid and looked extremely cultured. He continued to humiliate Li Kuang-tu and crazily bit his dignity. He watched as his face turned red, his expression twisted, his eyes ferocious, and his body trembled. Xiao Mahai did not stop and said casually. Li Kuang-tu stood in front of him, and these words were like knives stabbing into his chest. He breathed disorderly, and for a moment, he didn't even know how to refute. Xiao Mahai took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, maintained a polite and respectful smile, and said softly, "General, have a cigarette?" Silence. In a long silence, Li Kuang-tu was surrounded by extremely cold and sharp sword intent. He stared at Xiao Mahai, who was smiling, and the corner of his mouth twitched. After a long time, he let out a long breath. Xiao Mahai handed over the cigarette. A glimmer of light suddenly flashed between the two. No one in the hall noticed this detail. The light flashed from bottom to top, and in a flash, it had reached Xiao Mahai's arm. He really couldn't kill the butler here, but he didn't believe that he dared to completely fall out with him if he wanted to kill him with only one arm. If what he said was outside Emperor Dawn's palace, his life wouldn't be enough to save him. Here, it didn't matter if he kept one arm. Xiao Mahai didn't move. It seemed that he had no time to react. The light tore Xiao Mahai's sleeves in an instant, but it didn't touch his skin. Xiao Mahai's whole body seemed to suddenly become extremely illusory, and he directly widened the distance between him and Li Kuang-tu. The inconspicuous but extremely condensed sword light seemed to rush into nothingness. The space around Xiao Mahai was clearly distorted for a moment. The sword energy that Li Kuang-tu barely made melted rapidly in the distorted space. There was a breeze in the hall, and then it dissipated. Xiao Mahai, whose sleeves were completely torn, still held the cigarette. He smiled and said nothing, as if he had no fear or lingering fear. Every corner of Emperor Dong's palace was full of Li Tianlan's sword energy. This also meant that Li Tianlan was everywhere in Emperor Dong's palace. Naturally, this place was under his absolute control. Li Tianlan didn't bother to monitor the inside of Emperor Dong's palace, but he would naturally keep an eye on Li Kuang-tu. So he would pay attention to Xiao Mahai. So Xiao Mahai didn't show any mercy to Li Kuang-tu. He was indeed presumptuous. A dog who relied on his master's power to bully others, Xiao Mahai didn't care about this. He thought that he was Emperor Dong's lackey, so no matter what he did, as long as Li Tianlan didn't think it was inappropriate, no one could threaten him. "Look, you're anxious," Xiao Mahai said with a smile. Li Kuang-tu didn't speak. He took a deep look at Xiao Mahai, suddenly covered his mouth, and coughed violently. His injury, which had barely stabilized, seemed to break the balance again with his reluctance this time. Li Kuang-tu coughed crazily, and his lungs were torn apart. Xiao Mahai just looked at him, motionless, with indescribable indifference in his eyes. Li Kuang-tu coughed for nearly 3 minutes. His palms were full of blood, and a lot of blood froth flowed down his fingers, splashed on his clothes, and flowed to the floor. Li Kuang-tu wiped the corner of his mouth with the other hand and clenched his fists. "Take him to Senior Yu." Li Tianlan's voice rang in their ears. Xiao Mahai suddenly stopped smiling and nodded. He looked at Li Kuang-tu and said with a smile, "General, please." He waved to a cleaner not far away and motioned for him to clean the floor. Then he turned around and took Li Kuang-tu to the other side of the elevator, which was rarely used. Li Kuang-tu suppressed all the emotions in his heart, expressionless, and said nothing. He already understood that his provocation was asking to be humiliated. In the case that he couldn't kill Xiao Mahai, he really couldn't beat the butler of Emperor Dong's palace in a quarrel. Xiao Mahai entered a string of passwords, like a phone number in the elevator. Soon, an old but still energetic voice sounded in the elevator. "Who is it?" Li Kuang-tu's expression changed slightly. Xiao Mahai laughed and said, "Senior Yu, it's me. His Majesty asked me to take the general to you." The voice in the elevator paused, and then there was some doubt. General Li Kuang-tu. You want to see Mrs. Dongchen," Xiao Mahai said calmly. The other side of the elevator fell into silence. A few seconds later, Yu Donglai entered the password on his side. The elevator slowly descended and stopped at the 3rd floor underground. After the elevator door opened, the space of the 3rd floor underground was still separated from the space of the 3rd floor underground by a layer of extremely thick but extremely transparent glass. Yu Donglai stood outside the glass, looking at Li Kuang-tu in the elevator. The two looked at each other, and their eyes were extremely complicated. Xiao Mahai nodded to Yu Donglai. Yu Donglai pressed the button next to his hand, and the thick glass that could defend against rockets slowly opened to both sides. Yu Donglai didn't go in. Li Kuang-tu didn't come out. Xiao Mahai stood in the middle, purely treating himself as transparent. The atmosphere was indescribably awkward. After a long time, Li Kuang-tu smiled and took the initiative to break the silence. "Uncle Yu, long time no see." "How long did he say long time?" Yu Donglai's eyes were in a trance. It was more than 20 years since the last time they met. How many 20 years could there be in a lifetime? Yu Donglai took a deep breath, looked at Li Kuang-tu, and suddenly frowned. Injured? He knew that Li Kuang-tu had been injured when he was captured, but he also knew that during this time, Li Kuang-tu's injury had barely stabilized. Now Li Kuang-tu's breath was fluctuating, and his breathing was a little rapid and disordered, as if he had just been injured. "It's nothing." Li Kuang-tu smiled carelessly. Uncle Yu, is it enough for us to talk about the old days? Yu Donglai glanced at Xiao Mahai. Xiao Mahai touched his nose and said with a calm smile, His Highness means to let Elder Yu lead the way and take General Li to see Mrs. Dongsheng, and my role is to take General Li to see Elder Yu. Now that the task is completed, I should go up and report. Does Senior Yu have any instructions? Yu Donglai sighed and shook his head. Li Quantu walked out of the elevator and was silent. Xiao Mahai bowed slightly to Yu Donglai and took the elevator all the way up. Li Quantu and Yu Donglai talked about the old days. It sounded very sensitive, but there was nothing to doubt. Yu Donglai's status in Emperor Dong's palace was extremely high, but he could not be regarded as a core figure in Emperor Dong's palace. His granddaughter, Yu Qingyan, could be regarded as a core figure in Emperor Dong's palace, but she was still very young and could not be regarded as a high-level figure. However, as one of Li Honghe's sacred guards, Yu Donglai's existence itself was special. Having an elder in the family was like having a treasure. It was not an exaggeration to say that Yu Donglai's existence was one of the foundations of Emperor Dong's palace. Not to mention Ning Qianqing's future position in Emperor Dong's palace. Not to mention the relationship between Ning Qianqing and Yu Qingyan. Just from the fact that Yu Donglai occasionally cooked a table of dishes for them when he was in a good mood, it could be seen that Li Tianlan trusted him. Xiao Mahai naturally had no place to suspect a person who could directly contact with His Majesty's diet. The elevator went all the way up to the ground floor. The elevator door opened slowly. Xiao Mahai, who was about to go out, looked up and suddenly froze. Outside the door stood a languid and casual figure in simple casual attire. He was quiet and cold. Xiao Mahai bowed subconsciously and said respectfully, Madam, you did a good job. Qin Weibai smiled, and her voice was full of appreciation. Xiao Mahai shook his head silently. Come out, Qin Weibai said. Xiao Mahai nodded and walked out of the elevator. Qin Weibai didn't say much and walked into the elevator alone. The elevator door closed and went all the way down. Chapter 1268. Rows of medicine cabinets. Biological specimens soaked in liquid were neatly arranged. All kinds of poisonous creatures kept in glass cabinets. The flowers of the grotesque plants that had been cultivated. High-end test tables. Densely packed experimental equipment. Gloomy, cold, depressing, and gloomy. This was the third underground floor of Emperor Dong's palace. The territory of Yu Donglai, the poison doctor. Everything was the same as before. There's almost no difference except that the equipment was more advanced and the number of various specimens was more. It was like the original laboratory that belonged to Yu Donglai more than 20 years ago. Li Quanta looked around with some nostalgia and was in high spirits. He sat on the sofa in the middle of the laboratory with a lot of useful and useless data recorded by Yu Donglai on the desk in front of him. It's almost the same as before. Li Quanta chuckled and said, Uncle Yu, I still remember the first time I entered your laboratory. I was 13 years old. I rushed in with a smile and ran out crying. You also ran out with me. As for me, I only cared about crying when I rushed out, while you were almost paralyzed with fear. If it weren't for the security guards of the laboratory who rushed in quickly to deal with the aftermath, I guess you wouldn't even have rushed into your own laboratory. How dare you say that? If it weren't for your dirty hands at that time, I wouldn't have had such a psychological shadow. Yu Donglai laughed and scolded. He shook his head and sighed. Since then, when I see that thing, I'm not afraid, but I feel weak all over. It's not like in reality. Even on TV, or when I see those pictures or those toys, I have a feeling of numbness on my scalp and a cold sweat all over my body. Now when I watch TV alone and occasionally see that kind of scene, I shiver, and my heart can't stand it anymore. He picked up a large water cup and filled half a cup of hot water from the water dispenser to cool. Then he opened a few medicine cabinets, took out a few herbs that emitted a strange smell, and crushed them. He was weighing the amount. While busy, he asked casually, How about you? I'm not well either. Li Quantu smiled bitterly. Usually, I'm even more serious than you. Occasionally, I dream about it. After waking up, I don't dare to sleep again. Even when I close my eyes and think of those things, I have to hypnotize myself to forget it. Psychological shadow. It's almost a fatal weakness for me. After a pause, he continued, but fortunately, I have some achievements in the spiritual domain. After my martial arts were crippled, it could be considered as a different path. However, my spiritual power is different from that of the sanctuary. It could be considered as a different application of the way of the sword. It's hard to achieve the silent effect, but it's not a problem for me to hypnotize myself. So in this aspect, I can barely overcome it. That's good. Yu Donglai lowered his head and continued to fiddle with various crushed powders. He chuckled and said, "So, I'm really not a qualified poison doctor." He shook his head, as if he wanted to get rid of some images deep in his memory. That year, Li Kuang-tu, at the age of 13, entered his lab for the first time. He observed all kinds of living specimens in his lab with great interest, but he was scared by a poisonous snake in the window and accidentally knocked over the window. Li Kuang-tu was so scared that he cried and ran out of the lab. However, he didn't expect that Yu Donglai, who was known as a poison doctor, was so scared that his face turned pale and he couldn't even stand steadily. Yu Donglai was afraid of snakes. This was a secret that few people knew. It was also because of his fear that he kept that thing in his lab in order to avoid being found out by others. He didn't even touch it on normal days. It was a joke that someone who played with poisons was afraid of this thing. But Yu Donglai was really afraid. This kind of fear could even be said to be a psychological disease. It was not the fear or disgust ordinary people had, but a kind of fear that would make one's whole body stiff, face pale, scalp numb, and blood flow backward after seeing it. It was a fear that overwhelmed all reason. Except for this thing, Yu Donglai had never been afraid of anything in his life. And that farce also left a deep psychological shadow on Li Kuang-tu. Over the years, no matter where and when, as long as he saw it, he would not hesitate to completely smash it with sword energy. Also, after that time, Yu Donglai simply stopped pretending and never kept that thing again. Even if he needed to study it, he would send people to extract the poison. If he could avoid looking at it, he would absolutely not look at it. This is not a weakness. In terms of poison, in the whole dark world, Uncle Yu could be said to be in existence at the level of the ancestor. Li Kuang-tu said with a smile. Yu Donglai shook his head and poured all kinds of powder he had made together into the cup. Originally, there was only half a cup of hot water, but in an instant there was no heat. The white water in the cup turned into a strange pale green and began to bubble. Yu Donglai picked up the cup and put it in front of Li Kuang-tu, saying, "Drink it." Li Kuang-tu looked at the cup of green liquid and watched it become more and more viscous. He frowned slightly and did not speak. "Do you not trust my skill? Or do you not trust me?" Yu Donglai picked up some powder residue and asked without looking back. "No." Li Kuang-tu shook his head. "I still say the same thing that I said many times in the past. This thing looks really *king disgusting. Uncle Yu, you are not particular. Don't talk nonsense. I want to be particular. It's not a problem to make you a cup of colorful cocktails. Or are you healing or enjoying it? If you think it's disgusting, don't drink it. If you have the ability, don't get hurt. Just treat it as I am willing to serve you." It was exactly the same scolding as in the past. It was exactly the same tone as in the past. Li Kuang-tu's eyes were in a trance for a moment. When the Li family was still in its heyday, he was young and vigorous and made rapid progress in martial arts. But he was often injured. He fought with others and his own people, honed himself, and fought with others. Every time he was injured, he rarely went to the hospital. Usually, he went directly to Yu Donglai. Yu Donglai was known as the poison doctor. He was the ancestor of playing with poisons and could also be regarded as the ancestor of healing. Every time, Yu Donglai would give him a cup of green and disgusting thing to heal his wounds. It looked extremely ugly, but the effect was really effective. And every time, Li Kuang-tu was a little resistant. Yu Donglai had been forcing him to drink it, and even threatened to pour the green thing on his head. Li Kuang-tu smiled bitterly, shook his head, picked up the cup, and drank up the green liquid in front of him. Yu Donglai looked at him silently. When he finished drinking, he suddenly asked, "Kuang-tu, tell me the truth. Did you come down this time to see Rizhui or to find an old man like me?" Chapter 1269. Li Quanto heard Yu Donglai's voice, but he didn't answer because he didn't have time to care. He didn't know if the green viscous liquid was a familiar formula, but it was definitely a familiar taste. It was cold in the mouth, warm in the throat, and spicy in the abdomen. It was like a flame suddenly burning in the deepest part of his body. His blood seemed to be completely evaporated. The hot temperature penetrated into his skin from his internal organs, burning his pores and hair all over his body. The strong pain came roaring and almost drowned his reason. Li Quantu trembled all over and tightly grasped the edge of the table in front of him. Sweat oozed from his forehead and flowed quickly down his face drop by drop. Yu Donglai opened the drawer under the desk, took out a cigarette, lit it, and sent it to Li Quantu's mouth. Li Quantu's mouth kept twitching, and he shook his head slowly and laboriously. He was seriously injured. Under such pain, he didn't even have the strength to lift his hand, let alone smoke. Yu Donglai put the cigarette in his mouth and smoked it slowly. He was a poison doctor. He was good at killing people and saving people. His method of killing was silent, and he could make people die happy, but his method of saving people was cruel and overbearing, and he could make people hover between life and death. This could also be considered as his bad taste. What he gave Li Quantu was poison, which could be regarded as his exclusive formula. If the amount of this poison was large, it was enough to completely melt the internal organs of the human body in an instant. If it was concentrated and ignited, it was enough to destroy a city. However, if the dosage of this poison was precise and small to a certain extent, drinking it would greatly stimulate the potential of the human body, quickly repair a series of injuries in the body, and speed up the recovery speed. The effect could be said to be immediate. As for the poison contained in it, with the physical quality of a warrior, such a small amount could be completely ignored. The only bad thing was that it was very uncomfortable to drink it. Yu Donglai did it on purpose. It was a wicked hobby of his for many years. Li Quantu sat there, trembling and twitching for nearly 5 minutes before he slowly recovered. The severe pain and burning feeling came and went quickly. The cold sweat on his forehead quickly faded, and his pale face also recovered a little color. He was obviously much more energetic. He trembled and took a deep breath, then laughed and said in a hoarse voice, "Uncle, the old man said that this is your specialty, and you can make it milder." This was more than just a unique skill. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the recipe for this kind of thing was priceless. Yu Donglai only played with poison and didn't join any biological laboratory, but the effect of this thing was no less than most gene medicines. Needless to say, it could have an effect on people in Li Quantu's realm, which could instantly beat countless gene medicines. Li Quantu's current state was very poor, but after drinking this thing, his mental state had obviously improved a little. Although he was still 108,000 miles away from recovery, at least now he had the ability to barely make a move. If he chose to recuperate quietly, this spirit would pass after a few hours. After all, it was to stimulate his potential to recover, and he would also fall into a period of weakness for more than 10 hours. At that time, he would be extremely tired and sleepy. But after the period of weakness, his injury would recover faster again. Until the effect of the medicine was completely gone, he would drink the second cup, and so on. According to his current situation, it would probably only take about a month for his injury to recover to the state before the siege. Although that state was still seriously injured, at least it would not be as embarrassing as it was now. Moreover, this poison liked the cold and was easy to solidify. If it was made into sugar and carried on the body, it would be a life-saving thing in some cases, even for an expert like Li Quantu. What was more terrifying was that this thing could be used on Li Quantu. If the dosage was reduced again, it could naturally be used on ordinary elites. It could save lives and recover. In a desperate situation, when the ammunition and food were exhausted, this thing could be gathered together and ignited. After the release of the highly toxic gas reached a certain concentration, it could also kill a lot of people. The most important thing was that this poison took effect very quickly. Even if there was an antidote, it might not be in time. Moreover, the production of one of the main medicinal materials in the antidote was not much, which meant that there would not be too many antidotes. But it was not difficult to accumulate this poison. In addition to the trouble of making it, it was said that most of the materials were very common. What was a poison doctor? As a poison doctor who was once famous in the dark world and once the sacred guard of the god of war of Zhongzhou state, Yudonglai, in his heyday, was not an invincible realm expert, but his influence was more terrifying than that of an ordinary invincible realm expert. Of course, he had more than this unique skill, but even if he only had this skill, he could easily become a core high-level member if he joined any superpower. There is indeed a way to make it milder, but the taste is not right. I studied for a long time before I found this kind of medicinal material that can make people extremely painful. Every time I make this thing, if I don't add some of this, I always feel that I'm making something else. It's not beautiful, not beautiful. Yu Donglai shook his head and sighed. Li Quanta looked at him thoughtfully and said with a smile, "Maybe so. If I didn't feel pain just now, I would also feel that I was drinking something else." Over the years, when some old brothers were injured, they would inevitably mention Uncle Yu. "Do you remember Daybreak? He has nagged me many times." "Daybreak," Yu Donglai smiled and said, "He's a good boy. Unfortunately, it's hard to turn back with you." "Why should we turn back?" Li Quanta shook his head and said, "Whether it's me or Daybreak, we don't think we've done anything wrong. I'm from the Li family, and I want to take back what belongs to me." "What's wrong?" Yu Donglai took a drag on his cigarette. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Where's the Li family?" "Li Quangtu." Yu Donglai waved his hand and said softly, "The Li family has been destroyed by you. You destroyed it more than 20 years ago." From this point of view, Li Quanta nodded and said, "It's true. Winner takes all. I couldn't lose that year. I couldn't afford to lose. Since I lost, it's wrong. There's nothing to say. But no one blames you." Yu Donglai said lightly, "Winner takes all. That's life. No one can help it. But since you lost, you have to admit it. Even if you're wrong, you have to admit it. You said you want to take back what belongs to you. Quangtu, what else do you have except yourself? Everything in the Li family was destroyed by you. Now what's left of the Li family is what His Highness has guarded for more than 20 years. You say it's yours? Why? Did His Highness give it to you? Those, including the current purgatory of Heaven Capital, are what His Highness left to Tianlan. It's understandable that he didn't give it to you, but you can't rob it, let alone unite with outsiders to rob it. What you're doing now is capricious. You're suffering for yourself and the Li family. Look at the current Emperor Dong's palace in Tianlan. Quangtu, don't you understand? I don't support you robbing, but I can barely understand what you're doing. This is capricious. You think it's yours, but in fact, the Li family belongs to His Highness. You haven't even been the patriarch of the Li family. Why do you say the Li family is yours? If it's not yours, you still want to rob it. Isn't that the logic of robbers? Well, you can rob it, but what about now? Can you rob it? Is the purgatory of Heaven Capital stronger than Emperor Dong's palace? Or are you stronger than Tianlan? No, neither. You can be dissatisfied. You can rob it. But it's meaningless to struggle when you can't rob it. When you, in Tianlan, no, when you struggle away the relationship between the Li family and Tianlan, it will be hard for you to keep your life, not to mention owning the Li family. Li Quanta took a drag on his cigarette and remained silent. Yu Donglai's voice was very steady and calm. Although it was unpleasant to hear, it was not unacceptable, but it was just acceptable. Li Quanta shook off the ash and said in a deep voice, "Uncle Yu, you and I both know very well that Li Tianlan's surname is not Li, I know." Yu Donglai nodded. "But to put it bluntly, what does it have to do with you? Everything in the purgatory of Heaven Capital belongs to your father. You do have the right to inherit it, but your father also has the right not to give it to you. Your surname is Li, and you and His Highness are father and son, but he doesn't want to hand over the last power of the Li family to you. That's his business. It seems natural for a son to inherit his father's business, but you've failed. Your father doesn't agree with you inheriting the power of the Li family. This is his attitude. Is it wrong for him to disagree?" Li Quangtu's voice was angry. "You're the one who's confused." Yu Donglai's voice also became cold. I'm confused if I don't hand it over to you. Ridiculous. I'm confused if I hand it over to you. What can you do? Take these old assets and gamble again? The Li family and the Wang family have been friends for hundreds of years. You shed this layer of cordiality, and the Wang family fought back. You lost. You're not convinced, so you insist on robbing it? Can you? Look at what you've done in your life. The purgatory of heaven capital is now in your hands. What have you done? You can't rob it from Tianlan, but you can rob it from the Wang family? Not to mention Wang Tianzong. Can you solve it, even if Wang Shengxiao is there? I still say the same thing. The purgatory of heaven capital is your father's property. He can give it to you or not. It's his thing. Whatever he says, it's his thing. What he wants to give it to Tianlan. Even if there is no Tianlan, he will dismiss all the masters of the Li family and donate all his wealth to charity. What does that have to do with you? What's your father's property must be yours. What the fuck is this logic? He gave birth to you and raised you. Does he owe you? What's his is yours only if he gives it to you. If he doesn't give it to you, you can't rob it. As a son, don't you understand this? Li Guangtu's breathing was a little short. Yu Donglai was silent for a while and waved his hand tiredly. Guangtu, I don't want to say anything unpleasant, but you should think about it yourself. What's the point of doing this now, except for your own dissatisfaction? Li Guangtu was completely silent. He didn't want to explain anything, and he couldn't explain anything. Xiao Mahai directly exposed his posture that he had been holding. Yu Donglai, with a little anger, made him realize the reality. He knew what they said made sense. He really knew. He couldn't compete with Li Tianlan. That was the truth. He teamed up with Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu to occupy part of the power of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. He still had a chance. But the fact was that he couldn't compete with Li Tianlan alone. Li Tianlan's offer to him still echoed in his ears. It was a tempting condition that he couldn't accept. He didn't want to tell Yu Donglai what Li Huaqing would do after he agreed. Anyway, it was an excuse. If he joined Emperor Dong's palace, Li Huaqing would inevitably respond. But sometimes he and the Li family were two different things. The patriarch of the Li family, everything of the Li family, the peak of the Li family, that was what he had been pursuing and what he wanted to do most in his life. But now, except for the die-hard supporters of the purgatory of heaven capital, who else in the world would regard him and the Li family as one? No one would think so, and Li Huaqing naturally wouldn't. His joining Emperor Dong's palace would touch Li Huaqing's bottom line, but he was the only one who joined. Perhaps daybreak would also be added, but it was not something that couldn't be avoided from the perspective of the Li family. There were many ways to compromise and make concessions. But Li Guangtu didn't choose. He knew that he couldn't compete with Li Tianlan, but he wouldn't admit it. Whether he was naive or shameless or selfish, ignorant or paranoid, whatever he said. But this was him. It can't change anything. Li Guangtu whispered, "Uncle Yu, I've made up my mind. Li Tianlan is not a Li after all. The Li family's hundreds of years of foundation can't be given to others." Yu Donglai laughed out loud. In the dark laboratory, it was a series of chuckles. If he said this before, some people would believe it. He whispered, "But now, including those elites of the Li family who stand by you because of Tianlan's background in the purgatory of heaven capital, how many will believe it? Rushi is still in a coma, but her condition is not bad. She will wake up in a few years. She is Tianlan's woman. Their future children, whether boys or girls, will inherit everything of the Li family. We cannot talk about whether His Highness handed the Li family over to you or Tianlan's background. But can you say that the child of your own daughter is not a member of the Li family? Can you say that he is an outsider?" Li Guangtu opened his mouth. The anger in Yu Donglai's eyes was almost tangible. "If you dare to say that he is an outsider, I dare to slap you. I will slap you now. Do you believe it?" Li Guangtu shut up. His eyes were a little gloomy, but he did not speak. Yu Donglai's strength was nothing in his eyes. He was really seriously injured now. But he drank what Yu Donglai gave him and stimulated his potential. His body was now in a state of excitement after being seriously injured. He could barely make a sword move. If Yu Donglai was well prepared and given enough time, environment, and terrain, he could indeed achieve even more terrifying damage than Li Guangtu. But now, at such a close distance, facing Yu Donglai, whose state was declining and who was no longer in the thunder-shocking realm, Li Quantu's current sword move was enough to kill him dozens of times in an instant. However, there were many things that did not depend solely on strength. He could dislike Li Tianlan and want to kill him. But Yu Donglai, he was a close guard who followed Li Honghe. He was one of the few senior members of the Li family who had watched him grow up. He could refuse to obey Li Honghe. But Yu Donglai really did not owe him anything. He called him Uncle Yu willingly and naturally. Now, standing in front of him was an elder of the Li family. If the elder really wanted to beat him, Li Quantu could not fight back and could only accept it. Well, even if my grandson is not an outsider, Li Quantu moved his body and said in a hoarse voice, but who can guarantee that Li Tianlan will keep his word? Uncle Yu, you should know better than me how much Li Tianlan dotes on that witch. His enrich's child will inherit the Li family? Can't that witch get pregnant? His enrich's child is the future patriarch of the Li family. Then what should the child of him and that witch do in the future? Can she be reconciled? If she is not reconciled, what will she do? Emperor Dong's palace will be the dynasty of the dark world in the future. The scene is no worse than the ancient fight for the throne. If that witch wants to support her child, hey, I don't look down on Emperor Dong's palace, but if she wants a fight, who in Emperor Dong's palace can beat her? Qin Weibai, Moon God, and Wang Yuedong. Do you think Li Tianlan can treat them equally? Uncle Yu, do you believe that? I don't know. Yu Donglai said lightly. He was telling the truth. In Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan trusted him very much, and Qin Weibai was also very familiar with him. However, even Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai hadn't thought about what Li Quantu said. How could they tell him this? He shook his head and said slowly, in a few months after the election, the new group will be established. Emperor Dong's palace will be no worse than the Li family at its peak, or even stronger. The most important thing is that Tianlan is young, and Emperor Dong's palace has just begun. Quantu, you know what this means. So it's true that the Li family is Emperor Dong's palace. But if you say that Emperor Dong's palace is the Li family, then many people will not be convinced. You want to fight for the throne and kill each other. Have you watched too many TV dramas or history books? How much of what Emperor Dong's palace has now is brought by Little Bai? That's her dowry. Even if I have the cheek to say that she gave her dowry to Tianlan and Rushi's child instead of her own child, do you think it's appropriate? The current Emperor Dong's palace is a combination of the Li family and the Samsara palace. To put it bluntly, because of you, the proportion of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace is far less than that of the Samsara palace. The lord of Emperor Dong's palace can naturally afford a Li family head. If that day comes, Tianlan and Rushi's child will inherit the Li family, but not the position of lord of Emperor Dong's palace. It's true that Tianlan spoils Little Bai, but I think she deserves all this. And I know her better than you do. There are really not many women who can be so generous. Even if that day comes, Little Bai doesn't want the family business, the Li family, and things that don't belong to her. Your way of thinking is too extreme. You always think that with a big family and a big business, there will be a tragedy in the future when it comes to the successor. How can you be so sure that the next generation of Emperor Dong's palace will be separated from Xiao Bai's child? Can't they see that it's a win-win situation? Yu Donglai took a deep look at Li Quantu. The most important thing is that Little Bai has been with Tianlan all the time. With her means, can't she play with a few children? Is it difficult for her to make them like brothers? Li Quantu wanted to say Huawu, not only the current Huawu, and Huawu, who had died in the final battle in Heaven Capital. It couldn't change anything at all. Yu Donglai was indeed an elder, but he couldn't make decisions. Besides, he didn't have evidence. Even if he had evidence, so what? Li Tianlan didn't kill him, and Yu Donglai wouldn't stand up for him. Anyway, thank you, Uncle Yu, for the potion today. Feeling that his body was much better than before, Li Quantu said silently, Anyway, you are the son of His Highness. You still have to be dignified when you come to Emperor Dong's palace. Even if you leave, how can you look so sick? Yu Donglai shook his head. I wanted to persuade Uncle Yu to go with me, but it seems that there is no need to say it. Li Quantu smiled self-deprecatingly. If he could take Yu Donglai away today, then this experience of being captured would definitely be a great gain. It would not be an exaggeration to say that he had made a lot of money. Yu Donglai's means of playing with poison were secondary. He was Li Hong's close guard. For today's Li family, this identity alone could be said to be a shining signboard. Although Li Quantu had no contact with the outside world, he could roughly imagine his current situation. Moreover, Li Tianlan went to the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital today to give him a live broadcast, which let him directly see the hearts of many people in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. People's hearts were scattered. It was naturally difficult to lead the team. This could not be said to be Li Quantu's miscalculation. It could only be said that he underestimated Li Tianlan's strength. In the absence of Wu Qing's energy, he really did not expect that he, Jiang Shangyu, and Gu Xingyun would be no match for Li Tianlan. If he could kill Li Tianlan in the siege, even if the Li family and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were dissatisfied with his cooperation with Gu Xingyun, Li Tianlan would be dead after all, and Li Quantu would have a lot of room to maneuver. But now, not only did Li Tianlan not die, but he was even captured by Li Tianlan and brought back to Emperor Dong's palace. In this way, first he cooperated with Gu Xingyun, a life-and-death enemy, to deal with the heir of the Li family, and then he and Li Tianlan were determined. In the Purgatory of Heaven Capital, the people's hearts were inevitably unstable. At this time, if he could persuade Yu Donglai to go with him, it would play a great role in appeasing the people in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. And the most important thing was, after realizing that he was no match for Li Tianlan, Yu Donglai became more important. At Li Tianlan's level of strength, he almost did not need to be afraid of death, because there were very few things that could kill him. Why was Zhongzhou State so afraid of Li Tianlan? It was because it was difficult to really threaten Li Tianlan's life unless in some special circumstances. And once they fell out, as long as Li Tianlan was alive, it would be Zhongzhou State that would suffer terribly. High-tech weapons could flatten the entire Emperor Dong's palace in an instant, but it was still too difficult to kill Li Tianlan. At this stage of personal strength, if Li Tianlan really had nothing to worry about, it was enough to hurt Zhongzhou State when he went crazy. And Yu Donglai happened to have something that could pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. If Li Quantu shook his head violently, Yu Donglai's attitude was obvious. Such an attitude meant that there were no ifs. Sure enough, Yu Donglai directly said, "I'm old, I can't walk, and I don't want to. I can't persuade you to turn back, but I can't follow you into the pit. Again, Quantu, you have to admit your mistakes. If you do this, not only will it not benefit the Li family, but it will completely harm the Li family. Of course, if the Li family has no weight in your heart, and it's just an excuse for you to continue to struggle, then forget what I said. If that's the case, it's useless to say more. I like the current Li family and the current Emperor Dong's palace very much. Ning showed me the plan of Xianyuan City and Tianan some time ago. I also like it very much in the future. I have no regrets if I could be buried here in the future." Li Quantu nodded silently. He suddenly smiled and said with some reluctance, "Ning, is he your grandson-in-law?" "Yes." Yu Donglai suddenly became spirited. "That boy is not bad. He is very attentive to Qingyan. He can be counted as a support in the future." He paused and shook his head with some regret. These two children were ready to get married when they just graduated more than 2 years ago. Then they were caught up in the mess in Snow Country, and then Tianlan went to the desert. He just took charge of Xianyuan City and was delayed again. Now there are a lot of messy things. If they get married, it is estimated that they will get married after the election. Good things are strewn with setbacks. Li Quantu whispered, "I hope so." Yu Donglai smiled and said, "That boy has a good temper, but his talent in martial arts is a little poor. Let alone the invincible realm. It seems that he has no chance to enter the thunder-shocking realm." Li Quantu smiled and understood that Yu Donglai was being modest and showing off. He had never seen Ning Qiansheng, but he was very familiar with the name. When Li Tianlan first started out, there were 3 people around him at the beginning, not including Qinwei Bai. Ning Qiansheng, who was deliberately arranged by Dongqing Wudi to be around Li Tianlan. Yu Qingyan, who knew Li Tianlan's background. Li Beitian, who was led to the Sky Academy by Saint. They were the first people to follow Li Tianlan. Among the 3 people, Yu Qingyan's current status in Emperor Dong's palace was special, but it was not important. When she entered the Sky Academy, she was only in the ice-condensing realm. Now, a few years later, she had just entered the fire-flaming realm. In Emperor Dong's palace, she was a high-level official, but she did not hold any specific position. It seemed that Li Tianlan put her in that position because of their past friendship. But in fact, Yu Qingyan did not seem important because Yu Donglai was still there. She did not focus on martial arts at all. Instead, she followed Yu Donglai to accept his heritage of poison doctor. In the future, when Yu Donglai was gone, Yu Qingyan would be the new generation of poison doctor. She controlled something that Li Kuangtu coveted, something that could pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan, and the Tree of Life plan that the Li family had studied for hundreds of years. Such a position could be said to be the most important in Emperor Dong's palace. In addition to Yu Qingyan, Ning Qiansheng and Li Beitian also had their own opportunities. Li Beitian's talent in martial arts was recognized by everyone. Great Void Sword Master of the half-step invincible realm before the age of 30, his future prospects could be said to be limitless. Among the young generation of Zhongzhou State today, Li Beitian was firmly ranked in the top 5, including Li Tianlan, the Rain on the River, and Wang Xingxiao. Great Void Sword Intent of Mount Shu did not have anything unusual at the beginning of martial arts. Instead, it paid too much attention to the foundation. Sometimes it seemed very ordinary, but the higher it went, the more terrifying it was. After the thunder-shocking realm, Great Void Sword Intent began to exert its power. Li Beitian had been advancing like a hot knife through butter these years, until the present half-step invincible realm, and he had never stopped. Judging from his age, as long as there were no accidents, Li Beitian would at least be at the peak of the invincible realm in the future. He could definitely be said to be one of the cards of Emperor Dong's palace in the future. His path was already very clear. As long as he could cross the threshold of the invincible realm, the position of Deputy Palace Master of Emperor Dong's palace was inevitable. Even now, he could be said to be one of the core members of Emperor Dong's palace. Compared with Li Beitian, Ning Qiansheng's aptitude was not good, but his ability was not in martial arts. Judging from the current scale of Emperor Dong's palace, to be honest, Li Tianlan did not need a genius in martial arts. Emperor Dong's palace had never been short of geniuses in this aspect. On the contrary, he needed a leader who could see the overall situation. For example, the current military advisor. Another example was Li Huazhang of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. There was also Ning Qiansheng, the first mayor of Xinyuan City. What this position represented was self-evident. Sitting in this position meant that as long as Emperor Dong's palace was not destroyed in the future, Ning Qiansheng's future would be at least at the level of a counselor. There were already signs of it. After today, the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would become the Purgatory Legion, and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital would naturally leave Tiannan. Emperor Dong's palace had swept away the chaotic forces in another city, and in Tiannan, his only remaining opponent was the Burning Legion. Opponent? No, at most it was not an eyesore. Once the Burning Legion retreats from Tiannan, the entire Tiannan will fall. It would fall into the hands of Emperor Dong's palace and become the most stable foundation for Li Tianlan. After taking over the Tiannan region, the Flourishing Age Fund invested a large amount of money in the region. The Tiannan region was reorganized. Because of the existence of Emperor Dong's palace, the region was destined to develop rapidly. Before the general election at the latest, there would be only Emperor Dong's palace left in Tiannan. Then in 3 to 5 years, at the right time, Li Tianlan would formally propose to merge Tiannan into Zhongzhou State and completely dig up this land of more than 40,000 square kilometers that belonged to Annan. At that time, Tianan would become Tianan province of Zhongzhou State. And as the current mayor of Xinyuan City, Ning Qiansheng would also become a very high-ranking provincial speaker among the governors of Zhongzhou State. In this way, he was only one step away from becoming a counselor. This step, whether it was 5 or 10 years, could definitely be crossed. As long as he crossed it, Ning Qiansheng would become the leader of the new group and the real right-hand man of Li Tianlan. The road had been paved, and the future was extremely bright. With such a bright future in front of him, what was a talent in martial arts? I really envy you, Uncle Yu. Li Quanta laughed. His laugh was very polite, and he was very far away. What a pity, Yu Donglai said softly. It seems that when they get married, they probably can't invite you to the wedding banquet. Li Quanta said yes. It was not only him. In the purgatory of Heaven Capital, many people who were familiar with Yu Donglai and Yu Donglai could not attend the wedding banquet. Indeed, Emperor Dong's palace is very good. Since Uncle Yu has settled down here, I can understand that you don't want to leave. Your grandson-in-law has a bright future, and your granddaughter is also very valued. You live a comfortable life. With the support of the Flourishing Age Fund, Tianan will certainly have a good future. If it were me, I would also like to stay here and don't want to leave. Li Quanta said slowly. It's more than that. Yu Donglai looked at Li Quantu and smiled. I really like it here. Similarly, I don't like you very much. I don't agree with what you're doing now. If I don't agree, I naturally won't leave. Quantu, I watched you grow up, and we have known each other for many years. But now, you and I are on different paths, and we don't agree with each other. There is no need to talk about the rest. Li Quantu sat in silence. After a long time, he laughed. Shall I take you to see Rushi? Yu Donglai took the initiative to ask. Obviously, he was ready to end the so-called catching up. It's Moon God, Li Quantu insisted. Dongcheng Rushi. Moon Godly. 2 names, 2 personalities, with completely different meanings. Yu Donglai didn't take it seriously. He just nodded, turned around, and said, Let's go. Li Quantu didn't move. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, Uncle Yu, there's one more thing. Yu Donglai was not surprised. He slowly turned around, looked at Li Quantu, and sighed softly. So, you came down this time mainly to see me? If you just came to see Rushi, then they should be in the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace now, looking at the body data related to Dongcheng Rushi. But not now. In his laboratory, it was Li Quantu who proposed to catch up. Yu Donglai knew Li Quantu very well. At least it was more than 20 years ago. So when he took the initiative to talk about the old days, he understood something. It was true to see Rushi, but Li Quantu must have something to ask him to do. Half and half. Li Quantu said blandly. I told Li Tianlan that I came to see Rushi. If I didn't see you in the process, I would tell Li Tianlan to let you meet me. Do you think Tianlan will agree at that time? Yu Donglai said playfully. If you came to visit normally, it wouldn't be a big deal. But now that you are a captive, it's normal for you to see your daughter. You can see whoever you want. Don't you have any temper? If it's someone else, it's hard to say. Li Quantu raised the corner of his mouth. But if it's someone from the Li family, as long as he is in Emperor Dong's palace, I can see whoever I want, and Li Tianlan won't refuse. He can be said to be immature, but his pride is no worse than mine. Now, he has the victory in hand. If I want to see the old people of the Li family, he still hides, which proves his mood. So as long as I want to see them, he doesn't care. Because now the situation is clear, he has nothing to worry about. You also know that the situation is clear. Yu Donglai said blandly. I know. Li Quanta nodded, but I won't admit it. In order to deny this result, I will continue to work hard. Although, Uncle Yu, you definitely don't like to hear this, it's the truth, and it's what I'm going to do next. So, Yu Donglai remained calm. So, I also want a drop of cardinal blood and dark armor scale. Li Huaqing's voice was calm. Cardinal, dark armor, tree of life. This was the core heritage of the Li family, an experiment that had lasted for hundreds of years. The tree of life was not mature yet, but Red Sparrow dark armor could already play a role. Red Sparrow was the hottest poison. Dark armor was the coldest poison. When Red Sparrow's blood and dark armor scale were mixed together to make a poison, The poison's lethality to any creature was almost unlimited. This was definitely something that could pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. Not to mention him now. Even if Li Tianlan really became the chosen one, this poison could also kill him or completely destroy him. Red Sparrow Dark Armor and Tree of Life had always been in Yu Donglai's hands. Even when Li Honghe went to the border, he didn't take these three things with him. Instead, he left them to Yu Donglai to study. And now, Li Quanta came to him, asking for Red Sparrow's blood and Dark Armor scale. It went without saying what he was going to do and who he was going to deal with. Other people, even Zhang Shangyu and Wang Shengxiao, were not worthy of Li Quanta using this kind of thing. Yu Donglai stood there quietly, looking at Li Quanta with no expression. Li Quanta looked at him. He didn't give in. That's not yours. Yu Donglai repeated the old tune. I know. Li Quanta still didn't flinch, but looked into Yu Donglai's eyes. But Uncle Yu, it's not yours either. Yu Donglai frowned. Li Tianlan knows Dark Armor and Red Sparrow? Li Quanta asked. I don't know if he knows. Yu Donglai felt a little helpless. From the perspective of a leader, Li Tianlan was sometimes ridiculously lazy. The specific situation he showed was that he was really willing to delegate power and didn't care about anything. He liked to be a hands-off boss. Yu Donglai had told him about the black armored Red Sparrow once, and even handed the information to Li Tianlan. He could be sure that Li Tianlan didn't read the information at all. As for whether he remembered it or not, Yu Donglai didn't know. I only need a drop of blood and a scale. Li Quanta looked at Yu Donglai with sincere eyes. You could say that it's because of the past friendship or the current deal. As long as Uncle Yu can help me, there is no condition that can't be negotiated. Purgatory of Heaven Capital plus Li Quanta. Even if this lineup was not as good as Emperor Dong's palace. But such a deal was also a very tempting thing. Yu Donglai smiled. Okay, send your son to Emperor Dong's palace. Let him recognize Tianlan as his foster father and draw a clear line with Purgatory of Heaven Capital. I can give you what you want. Foster father. Although Huawu was young, in terms of seniority, he was only Li Tianlan's younger brother. The anger in Li Quantu's eyes suddenly rose, and he said in a deep voice, Uncle Yu, are you kidding? Are you also kidding? Yu Donglai said coldly, just like the condition I put forward, you and I both know that it's impossible. The Red Sparrow Dark Armor is something that can hurt Tianlan. I now live in Emperor Dong's palace. My granddaughter will be the core of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, and my grandson-in-law will be a senior member of Emperor Dong's palace. Quang-Tu, tell me, which thing around me has nothing to do with Emperor Dong's palace? You want to deal with Tianlan, and you even want to use the thing that you made a deal with me to deal with Tianlan. Is your uncle a typical traitor in your eyes? The corner of Li Quang-Tu's mouth moved. Say no more. Yu Donglai's voice was cold. Don't think about it. The Red Sparrow Dark Armor is indeed in my hands, but I can tell you that as long as I am alive, I will not give it to you. It's not mine, but the research right is with me. I can guarantee that I will not use it to deal with you. He slowly turned around and walked to the elevator. Are you coming? Li Quanta wanted to say something, but stopped on second thought. He really wanted to find Yu Donglai today, but he did not expect to persuade Yu Donglai to join him. Advance in order to retreat. His real purpose was the Red Sparrow blood and the Dark Armor scale. This was what he had been thinking about after he knew that he was held captive in Emperor Dong's palace, because it was indeed something that could pose a fatal threat to Li Tianlan. Therefore, he thought for a long time and prepared a lot of excuses. But he did not expect that as soon as he started, Yu Donglai would directly refuse and leave no room for negotiation. Yu Donglai walked to the elevator without looking back. Li Quanta stood up with no expression on his face and followed him. Yu Donglai entered the password for the elevator to go down. While waiting for the other end of the elevator to enter the password, Yu Donglai said calmly, I still say the same thing. Your struggle now is really meaningless. The Red Sparrow Dark Armor is indeed something that can hurt Tianlan. But now, some things should be different from what you think. Yu Donglai said softly, there's a real expert in Emperor Dong's palace now. Even if I really give you what you want, you can't kill Tianlan or even seriously injure him. Li Kuang-tu was stunned. He shook his head and said, "I don't believe it. Believe it or not, it's up to you." Yu Donglai's attitude was indifferent. Li Kuang-tu looked at Yu Donglai seriously and asked, "Who is the expert that Uncle Yu is talking about?" Yu Donglai did not answer this question. He thought of the fat man who opened a clinic in the central area of Emperor Dong's palace and had nothing to do all day but could go in and out of Li Tianlan's residence at will. When Li Tianlan brought Li Kuang-tu back, he wanted to help him stabilize his injury. At that time, the fat man was not there. So the first person that Li Tianlan thought of was Yu Donglai. But at that time, Li Kuang-tu's injury was so serious that even Yu Donglai did not dare to make a move at will. Then Li Tianlan called Nailan Shuriying. Nailan Shuriying injected some gene medicine that could stabilize Li Kuang-tu's body. Her suggestion at that time was to let Li Kuang-tu sleep. Li Tianlan refused. That night, Xian Yuan Wushang returned to Emperor Dong's palace from Yuzhou. More than 10 hours later, Li Kuang-tu completely woke up. There was no dormancy, no poison. Just like that, he woke up naturally. In more than 10 hours, he recovered to the extent that it would normally take several months to recuperate. Yu Donglai did not know the origin of Xian Yuan Wushang, but there was this mysterious doctor guarding Emperor Dong's palace here, which had made Yu Donglai doubt the power of black armor and cardinal. So during this time, he rarely went out of the laboratory to the ground. Most of the time, he was studying how to make cardinal and black armor evolve again. Li Kuang-tu looked at Yu Donglai seriously for a while. Seeing that Yu Donglai did not want to speak, he shook his head and fell silent. The elevator went all the way down. When it stopped, it was already in front of the biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace. Yu Donglai entered the password again. The elevator opened, and the two walked out. Then they stopped at the same time. Yu Donglai froze for a moment and laughed. Li Kuang-tu stood still and narrowed his eyes. In his sight, Qin Weibai, who had been there for a long time, was sitting on the sofa in the laboratory rest area. She was holding a glass of juice and sucking it with a straw. In front of her, there was a small pile of dried fruit shells. "You're here." Seeing Yu Donglai and Li Kuang-tu walk out of the elevator, Qin Weibai stood up and looked at Li Kuang-tu with a smile. She reached out and pointed to the various equipment and hibernation chambers in the laboratory. She chuckled and said, "Your Highness, this is not your first time here, is it?" Chapter 1270. She came. It was this feeling again. It was this F***king feeling again. Li Kuang-tu held his breath slightly. Facing Qin Weibai's gaze, a clear fierceness flashed in his eyes. He didn't like this woman. From the first time he saw Qin Weibai, Li Kuang-tu was very sure about this feeling. That feeling was amazing, perfect, and dreamy. Even when he connected Huowu's death with Qin Weibai, Li Kuang-tu even thought that if she killed his son, he would let her give birth to another son for him. This was a woman that no man could resist. But Li Kuang-tu just wanted her body. No, he didn't. Standing there, such a woman would make most men have the idea of conquering her, and it would take absolute courage. It was a feeling that he was seen through at any time. All his thoughts, all his means, even the things he didn't think of, were transparent in front of her. Li Kuang-tu had disgust, hatred, fear for her, and even fear that he didn't want to admit. Facing such an opponent, he really had a feeling that he couldn't sleep or eat well. This feeling appeared when he saw Qin Weibai for the first time. On that rainy night in East Island, when she appeared in front of him in a simple shirt and black skirt, she was peerless. But behind this dreamy appearance, he saw an unfathomable abyss. Li Kuang-tu closed his eyes and forced himself to calm down. But Yu Donglai, who was standing next to him, clearly felt that Li Kuang-tu's body was constantly tense, and even his hair was standing on end. Yu Donglai couldn't help laughing. Li Kuang-tu didn't notice. Standing here, he felt his vulnerability for the first time. He was seriously injured and his strength was greatly reduced. For the first time, he found that he even lost most of his courage to face this woman. And the remaining half was laughably from Yu Donglai. If there was no Yu Donglai in the enclosed space, not counting Dongxing Rushi and Situ Wanjie who were in a coma, This was a real man and a woman alone. Flirtatious? Li Quanta felt that he would not think of these things unless he was crazy. In fact, if Yu Donglai wasn't with him and he met Qin Weibai here alone, he even felt that he didn't want to walk out of the elevator at all and would go back the way he came. Because this woman was extremely smart. But at the same time, this woman was also extremely crazy. She had wanted to kill him for a long time. Li Quanta knew. In fact, when the two of them met for the first time, he had vaguely sensed it. And today, Li Tianlan wanted to let him go because of the deal he made with Li Huaqing. It could even be said that Qin Weibai was involved in this deal. But how could a woman be judged by logic? If she was unhappy, if she regretted it, if she didn't like him, if she suddenly had her period, too many ifs could cause Li Quanta to die here today. That would really be a futile death. Li Huaqing might be angry, but he was trying to keep her alive. Li Quanta and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital were both dead. Li Quanta did not expect them to turn hostile and avenge him. As for Li Tianlan, what could he do to Qin Weibai? What could he do to Qin Weibai? Toss him on the bed, toss him twice, spank him twice, and that was it. But he was really dead. He might really be killed by this crazy woman. Qin Weibai took a step forward. Li Quanta took a deep breath and tried his best not to let himself step back. His face was tight and looked a little livid in the dark laboratory, with a kind of indifference. You know, I've been here before. I'm not surprised at all, Qin Weibai said quietly. The defense monitoring system of Emperor Dong's palace could be said to be the best in the world, but there was still room for improvement. Before Li Tianlan came back, most of the intruders could be detected here. But for Li Quanta, an expert who had surpassed the invincible realm, he could almost come and go as he pleased. Qin Weibai could be sure that Li Quanta had been here before, not entirely by speculation, but by leaving a sword intent here by Wu Qing. If there were no intruders here, Wu Qing would never do this. But there was nothing to worry about. Ordinary people could not appear here. Those who could lie here must be people that Emperor Dong's palace attached great importance to. So every hibernation chamber was connected to the heartbeat of the wounded. Once the heartbeat of the wounded stopped, the entire castle would be completely closed from the inside out. In terms of the current structure of Emperor Dong's palace, it was impossible for Li Tianlan to come out without paying a price when the underground was completely closed. So even if someone could successfully sneak in, they would not dare to kill, or they would be courting death, unless they were real men of sacrifice. And men of sacrifice at the peak of the invincible realm, there was no force in the world that could do such a thing. Let's go. I'll take you to see Rushi. Qin Weibai reached out and pressed the switch of the first area of the laboratory. Soft lights lit up in the laboratory. 2 hibernation chambers were placed side by side in that area, and they were in the operating state. Above the hibernation chambers, rows of screens slowly showed various body data that Li Quanta could not understand. Her name is Li Yueshan. Li Quanta emphasized it again. Dongqing Rushi was the second miss of the Dongqing clan, a woman who was full of thoughts about Li Tianlan. She was his daughter, but he appreciated Li Yueshan's personality more. Qin Weibai stopped and said with a smile without any change in her expression, Li Yueshan, oh, she's dead. Murderous intent rose without warning. Li Quanta stopped where he was. What do you mean? That personality disappeared, Qin Weibai said blandly. Qin Weibai said faintly, split personality is a kind of mental illness. The palace master helped Rushi in Snow Country. You should know that she is a master in the spiritual field. It is not too difficult to erase a personality. Although it is not easy, she succeeded. So Dongqing Rushi is Dongqing Rushi. The Li Yueshan you miss all the time no longer exists. She kept walking forward. Rushi is there. It's up to you whether you want to see her or not. Disappeared, Li Quanta muttered to himself. He snorted. It's not completely disappeared. It's just a subpersonality and buzz. The space in the laboratory was suddenly distorted. The sharp and shining sword energy took shape directly without any preparation. A storm appeared in the dark space. Li Quanta's body was completely tense, and his face, which had just appeared a little ruddy, instantly turned pale again. His eyes were blood red, and the surging spiritual power turned into the purest sword energy. The sword energy surged like a storm, and the cold airflow surged wildly. Without the slightest warning, the moment the wind sounded, the endless sword energy had completely enveloped Qin Weibai's figure. Blood mixed with broken bones exploded in the surging sword energy. Li Quantu roared ferociously as if he had lost his mind. "How dare you kill her? How dare you kill her?" Blood splashed everywhere. Qin Weibai disappeared. The sword energy also disappeared. Then the blood on the ground also disappeared. Li Quantu's pupils contracted slightly, and he subconsciously turned to look at his side. Only then did he realize that it seemed to be too quiet around him when he took action. Yu Donglai didn't stop him. From beginning to end, the old man of the Li family didn't even make a sound. Li Quantu turned his eyes. There was nothing around him. Li Quantu turned his head. Behind him, at the elevator exit, Yu Donglai was standing there, looking at him helplessly and shaking his head. He began to be in a trance. Li Quantu's body shook a little. The light in his sight lit up. Qin Weibai reached out and pressed the switch of Area 1. The soft light lit up in the laboratory. 2 hibernation chambers were placed side by side in that area, and they were in operation. Above the hibernation chamber, various body data that Li Quantu couldn't understand were slowly scrolling on the rows of screens. Qin Weibai stood in front of him and looked at him expressionlessly. She seemed to be a little angry. Li Quantu closed his eyes and took a deep breath. After a long time, he asked, "The transcendent realm?" "Almost there," Qin Weibai said faintly. "Spiritual domain. Spiritual domain," Li Quantu muttered to himself, and the corners of his mouth kept twitching. He was also a guru in the spiritual domain, and he was almost at the transcendent realm. But his spiritual power was extremely turbulent. His spiritual power was pure sword energy. In Qin Weibai, such spiritual power was the kind of power that was impossible to guard against and could change everything silently. Qin Weibai couldn't turn her spiritual power into sword energy. Li Quantu also couldn't hypnotize others with spiritual power. So at that moment, he was hypnotized by Qin Weibai. Li Quantu's mouth moved. "Moon God, is it still important?" Qin Weibai looked at Li Quantu with some playfulness. "The important thing is that you just wanted to kill me, and you have already taken action. Your killing intent is so determined. Tell me, how should I kill you next to make you die in peace?" Chapter 1271. Qin Weibai showed her killing intent. She asked Li Quantu how to kill him so that he could rest in peace, like a joke. It was faint, not obvious, very casual and careless. But this kind of killing intent was extremely intuitive, because everyone knew that it was not a bluff. If Qin Weibai wanted to kill him, she could do it now without waiting for the future. Li Quantu laughed. He tried to make a move, but failed. His injury became more and more serious. In the dark and closed environment, it was even a little difficult for him to breathe. He glanced at Qin Weibai very coldly and walked to the hibernation cabin with the light on. "You have the ability to kill me. I even think that you will not bear any consequences if you kill me now. I have to admit that you have always been the person I can't see through the most. I don't know what you think, what you want to do, and what you want to get. Because of your existence, I have to constantly think about every step to deal with Li Tianlan, for fear that it is a trap." Li Quantu coughed twice and shook his head. "In that case, I simply won't guess. As long as a person dies, whether he is willing or not, he will die in peace. If you want to kill me, in any way you want." Qin Weibai stood where she was, as if hesitating or thinking about something. Li Quantu slowly walked to the hibernation cabin. The light in the hibernation cabin was also on. Dongqing Rushi was still in a coma, and her expression looked very tranquil. The exposed skin showed a kind of glowing white and tender skin under the light. Li Quantu looked at his daughter silently. His and Li Shi's daughter. Dongqing Rushi was in a coma in the hibernation cabin, like a commodity without any vitality. Li Quantu was expressionless. Moon God. Whoa. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Both of my children were killed by you. I don't know what you were talking about." Qin Weibai stood behind Li Kuang-tu and calmly glanced at Yudonglai, who was sitting in the reception area and did not follow them, and said calmly, "You dare to do it, but dare not admit it?" Li Kuang-tu sneered. Although there was no evidence, Li Kuang-tu had basically confirmed that the person who had killed his son in East Island was the master of Samsara Palace after a series of vague clues were constantly digging into it. Only the master of Samsara Palace. If it was just the likes of military counselor and saint, Huwu could run away even if he couldn't defeat them. Only the real invincible realm experts could kill Huawu there quietly. At that time, everyone in the Dark World was attracted to East Island. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital had not yet been born. There in the dark, the Dark World was shining. The intelligence system of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital knew the whereabouts of all invincible realm experts during that time. During that time, no invincible realm expert appeared in Ninghu. The master of Samsara Palace was the only one. After the final battle with Gu Xingyun, although she had been recuperating in Zhongzhou's state, no one had ever seen her. During that time, Qin Weibai was also in East Island. She was definitely an insider, or even participant. "I don't dare." Qin Weibai pursed her lips and smiled, looking elegant and graceful. Li Kuang-tu gritted his teeth. Huawu was born not long ago, and Tianlan just came back from the headquarters of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. He didn't hurt the child, and I have been here all the time. How could I kill him? Qin Weibai said. Li Kuang-tu took a deep breath and said coldly, "You and I both know that Huwu is the eldest son in East Island. If he is still alive, he should be only 2 years younger than Li Tianlan, and he should be able to enter the invincible realm now. If you weren't afraid that his existence would threaten Li Tianlan's position, are you kidding?" Qin Weibai's clear voice suddenly had a trace of undisguised mockery and contempt. Li Kuang-tu fell silent. "You know what kind of situation your son is in. He is in his teens, but he bears the power of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm. Li Kuang-tu, to be honest, do you really think of him as your son? His body can't bear that kind of strength at all. Under such circumstances, he is suffering great pain almost all the time. Whether he is awake or in a coma, the pain has never disappeared. I have never seen anyone train a successor in such a way. At the youngest age, you completely and unreservedly squeeze all the potential in his body. Don't you know what this means? You really know his existence. It's you." Li Kuang-tu slowly turned his head to look at Qin Weibai. For the first time, there was a touch of undisguised gloom and hatred in his eyes. Huawu's existence was extremely secretive. Except for himself, only Daybreak, Dawn, and Phoenix in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital knew of his existence. And these 3 people had no possibility of betrayal, let alone Li Kuang-tu. If it wasn't them who did it, then who else knew of his existence? Huawu must have been killed by them. Although he already knew what was going on in his heart, when he heard Qin Weibai clearly say Huawu's physical condition at this time, the feeling of finally finding evidence and being confirmed still made Li Kuang-tu feel a strong hatred directly emerged in his heart. "I know of his existence, but it doesn't mean I want to kill him. Haven't you heard of the power of the Samsara Palace's intelligence system?" Qin Weibai sneered and said, "Why should I kill him? Does your son deserve to threaten Tianlan's position? Li Honghe chose Tianlan as a successor. Do you think he will be devoted to your son? A son with half of East Island's blood flowing in his veins? Do you think it's possible? He doesn't even like you. How could he like his grandson, whom he has never met? Or do you think your son's talent can threaten Tianlan when he grows up? Perhaps he was indeed very talented, but his talent was destroyed by you. A so-called expert cultivated in such a way is as fragile as a piece of paper. Your so-called son, in your eyes, is there any difference between him and a consumable? After squeezing out all his potential, the upper limit of the thunder-shocking realm in his teens has long been determined. He can't even reach the peak of the invincible realm. Do you think he is qualified to threaten Tianlan? Li Kuang-tu, that's not your son. He's just someone you cultivated for yourself. Sometimes, you need to sacrifice him to achieve your own goals. He's just an animal's thug, or a man of sacrifice. The corner of Li Kuang-tu's mouth moved, and he said stiffly, "Shut up. You be *TCH with long hair, but short vision." Snap! In the clear sound, the atmosphere in the laboratory suddenly became silent for a moment. Yu Donglai, who had been observing in the direction of the reception area, moved slightly. He hesitated for a moment and still didn't come over. Qin Weibai pulled out a disinfectant wipe from the side of the hibernation chamber and wiped her hands. She smiled casually and said, "It's a pity that there's no one around. Otherwise, I wouldn't have slapped you myself. But it feels good. You're worse than an animal. Why do you have to call me 8B *TCH? Li Kuang-tu, who was suddenly slapped in the face, didn't cover his face in disbelief, nor did he fight desperately. Fight desperately? He couldn't even beat an ordinary person now. In front of a spirit grandmaster like Qin Weibai, he had long lost the qualification to fight desperately. He reached out his hand and touched his swollen face, which was in pain, and laughed happily. "I'll remember this slap in the face. If you don't kill me today, I'll pay it back. I'll wait." Qin Weibai casually threw the wipe she had wiped her hands into the trash can. She looked at Dongqing Rushi in the hibernation chamber and suddenly said, "In fact, I probably know what you're thinking, and I also know that what you're thinking, even you don't think it's possible. Squeezing out one's potential to increase one's strength is a crazy method that disregards everything. For hundreds of years, all the major forces have been using this method to cultivate their own death warriors. Other than you, I've never heard of any force using this method to cultivate their own sons. It's not that there aren't successful examples." Li Kuang-tu said in a low voice, a little depressed. There were successful examples, and they really did exist. That was why he said that Qin Weibai had long hair and short vision. "There are," Qin Weibai sneered. "But it's a miracle. For hundreds of years, there has only been one successful example. Do you think your son is worthy of that person? There was indeed one successful example in hundreds of years. That was a story. That was hundreds of years ago, in the era when Zhongzhou State's national strength was flourishing and Zhongzhou State was not the strongest country. There was a story about a young man who wanted to climb up at all costs and a simple daughter from a wealthy family. Countless meticulous calculations allowed this story to have a perfect beginning, but at the same time, it was destined to have a tragic ending. In order to further his career, the young man who succeeded sent his wife to the most secret prison in Zhongzhou State at that time, along with the unborn child in his wife's belly at that time. The tortured woman gave birth to the child in prison. What was even funnier was that because of the turmoil in the prison that year, the chaos from inside to outside, and some luck, the child actually escaped from the prison at that time. There were often incredible coincidences in the arrangement of fate. The child who escaped from the prison and lost his mother at only a few years old did not freeze to death in that winter in Yuzhou. When he was looking for food in the garbage dump, he met a couple whose family was already down and out, but not really frustrated. The couple took him out of Yuzhou and went to Kunlun Mountain, where they lived in seclusion. This was the example that Li Kuang-tu mentioned. It was the child who escaped from the prison, the one who lost his mother and escaped from the prison with only hatred and extremes left in his mind. Hatred was the strongest will. That will turned into a flame, almost burning the child into a complete madman. He trained in all kinds of extreme environments, ignored any pain and suffering, and even became stronger regardless of life and death. He burned his potential at all costs, and even tortured his body to the point where it would completely collapse and die at any time. But at the same time, he also gained almost invincible strength. As for the price, he walked on the edge of death every minute and second. The child who grew up was lucky because he did not die and succeeded in killing his biological father and the huge group behind his biological father. This was a tragic story, and it was too long ago. For some reason, the record of this story in the history of Zhongzhou State was not very clear. So until now, almost no one knew how the child in the story had been trained to reach that level. But the name of that child still shone in the long history of Zhongzhou State. He was the strongest national god of war since the founding of Zhongzhou State. His name was Lin Xianyuan. Today's ancestor of the Lin clan, the founder of the Li family, created the 24 moves of sword, the map of God of War of the Li family and the Lin clan, pushed the Wang family of Beihai to the peak, and turned Zhongzhou state into the strongest overlord. Beihai had the stage of formidable person. The stone of formidable person was on the stage of formidable person. And Lin Xianyuan was the only name carved on the stone of formidable person that could stand side by side with the chosen one ancestor of the Wang family of Beihai. This was the successful example that Li Kuangta mentioned. Obviously, he wanted to train his son into another Lin Xianyuan. But it was just as Qin Weibai said. He could only think about it. Even he knew that it was unlikely. At that time, Lin Xianyuan was not only the national god of war of Zhongzhou state, but also the only god of war of the Wang family of Beihai. He did live to reach that height, but if the Wang family of Beihai hadn't helped him at all costs, even he wouldn't have survived. Can you afford that level of support? Even if you sell your current purgatory of heaven capital, including you and your child, you can't afford it. Qin Weibai said lightly. The Wang family of Beihai's support for their god of war still left traces. For example, the current biological laboratory of the Wang family of Beihai. There was no such thing as a biological laboratory in that era. The Wang family of Beihai was now developing all kinds of potions, including the immortality potion that they treasured. To put it bluntly, the Wang family of Beihai set up a department for their god of war to survive and for the little princess of the Wang family of Beihai to keep her man alive. Such a move couldn't be solved by burning money. Many resources and countless rare materials were desperately consumed. The current purgatory of heaven capital really couldn't afford it. Even the current Emperor Dong's palace didn't dare to take too many risks if there was no clear direction. In fact, there's another way. Li Kuangta said lightly, his eyes flashing with anger and helplessness. I know what you mean. Qin Weibai's voice was more mocking. You mean the dragon vein? In other words, the flower that you've been longing for? Li Kuangta was silent. It's a joke. Qin Weibai shook her head. That flower has always been in my adoptive father's hands. Do you think you have any means to trick a metaphysics grandmaster to take the dragon vein? That belongs to Tianlan. Do you think you have a chance? Huh, Li Kuangta sneered. You seem to have forgotten that I also have the luck of the dragon vein. Not anymore. Almost instinctively, Qin Weibai said this. The luck of the dragon vein in Li Kuangtu had been extracted by Xin Xuanzi before he died. After saying this, she suddenly fell silent, because she suddenly thought of a doubt that she hadn't figured out before. Now Li Kuangta finally gave her the answer. Qin Weibai narrowed her eyes, and the coldness in her eyes became sharper. Hua Wu is my son. Even if I can't get the flower from Wu Wei, I can get rid of him and extract the dragon vein in my body and transfer it to him. In this way, Hua Wu's body will be nourished by infinite vitality. He won't be afraid of any injuries, and naturally, he won't have to worry about his body collapsing. In this way, Hua Wu will definitely be able to break through the supreme realm and become the chosen one. Impossible, Qin Weibai said lightly. He doesn't deserve it. What qualifications do you have to say this? Li Kuangtu said disdainfully. Because I've seen him. Qin Weibai suddenly laughed. She was telling the truth. She had really seen Hua Wu, who was killed by them that year. Not the one she had seen, but the other one she had seen and even fought with. But they were one. She had seen the other one, and naturally, she had seen it. That was Li Kuangtu's first son, Li Huawu. He was also the heavenly Emperor Huawu in another time and space. Qin Weibai had never been very clear about the use of Huawu, who was cultivated in this extreme way. Under normal circumstances, even if Huawu didn't die, his upper limit in the future was the invincible realm. He couldn't even reach the peak of the invincible realm, which was probably the level of Moongazer and Song at this time. But in that time and space, when they finally besieged Dongqing Huangtu, the strength that the heavenly Emperor Huawu showed was indeed at the peak of the invincible realm, which was equivalent to Li Kuangtu and Lin Fengting before the breakthrough. This was obviously a little unscientific. And now, the reason was found. It was the dragon vein in Li Kuangtu. Qin Weibai fell silent. Why did they kill Huowu back then? Qin Weibai could feel the inner feelings of her other self. It was not because he could threaten Li Tianlan. At that time, Huowu's performance was amazing, but in the long run, he was really not a threat. The reason why they took action at that time, it was because of hatred. That was the deepest hatred of her other self for the Li family. Why was it like this? Qin Weibai pursed her lips. Not every Grandmaster of Metaphysics could extract the dragon vein. At the very least, they should have a relatively detailed understanding of the dragon vein. To put it bluntly, the fate of Zhongzhou's state was endless vitality. How ethereal was it before no one carried the dragon vein? Without a specific understanding, Xian Xuanzi could not extract the dragon vein at all. Even if he had a specific understanding, it was great luck that Xian Xuanzi could do it. In other words, after he joined the Samsara Palace, he learned what the so-called dragon vein was from Qin Weibai. But in another time, in space, Qin Weibai and Xian Xuanzi basically had no intersection. There was only one person who could extract the dragon vein from Li Kuangtu and transfer it to Huowu. That was Great Master Wu Wei, who also had no intersection with Qin Weibai in that time and space. The transfer of the dragon vein helped Huowu break through the upper limit, which meant that in the case of Li Tianlan's existence, the Li family's opposition, Li Kuangtu could not instruct Great Master Wu Wei. So the only one who could instruct Great Master Wu Wei was Qin Weibai. Took a deep breath. All the questions came back. Why did the person who could instruct Great Master Wu Wei do this? When this question appeared, the answer was so obvious. Under such circumstances, if Li Tianlan, who carried half of the dragon vein, died, his vitality and fate would naturally be directly transferred to Huowu. The Li family, Li Huowu, Li Honghe, that kind of hatred Qin Weibai really understood. Suddenly, I really want to kill you, Qin Weibai whispered. Li Kuangtu's pupils contracted suddenly. At this moment, Qin Weibai's killing intent was still very faint, but Li Kuangtu really felt a kind of near-fatal danger, which was completely different from the feeling just now. Soon, Qin Weibai shook her head again. No, not only you, but you and your father deserve to die. No, all three of you deserve to die. Li Kuangtu was silent for a long time before asking, "Do you hate us?" "Shouldn't I?" Qin Weibai slowly turned her head and looked into Li Kuangtu's eyes. At this moment, Li Kuangtu had a creepy feeling for no reason. Including that old B** starred? Li Kuangtu braced himself to ask. He had a very bad relationship with Li Honghe. When he mentioned him, he usually called him an old B** starred. He deserves to die the most. Qin Weibai whispered. Unfortunately, he's dead. Chapter 1272. Qin Weibai suddenly felt extremely aggrieved and annoyed. Li Honghe, Li Kuangtu. At this moment, Qin Weibai was not even sure whether the father and son had turned against each other and were at odds with each other for many years. Was it a two-man show? But one thing was certain. Whether the father and son had turned against each other or not, at least in that space-time, when the best opportunity appeared, Li Honghe chose his grandson. It was not Li Tianlan. It was Li Huowu. That was why Li Huowu could break through his upper limit and become a top expert at the peak of the invincible realm. And when Dongsheng Huangtu perished, his luck with a huge vitality was transferred to Li Huowu. What realm would Li Huowu break through to? To some extent, Li Kuangtu's plan really succeeded in that space-time. Qin Weibai was no longer interested in thinking about Li Honghe's thoughts. There could be many explanations for this. For example, the cooperation between the Li family and the Dongsheng clan was a way out that Li Honghe thought of in a desperate situation. For example, Li Tianlan was the best choice at that time. But when there was a better candidate and the other party had extraordinary momentum, it was natural to give up Li Tianlan. Another example was that Li Tianlan was an outsider after all. Even if Dongsheng Rushi was his granddaughter, the one who would inherit the Li family in the future was only a grandson after all. All the ideas could be understood, but it was no longer important. The important thing was that Li Honghe did make that choice. The important thing was that Li Honghe and Li Huowu had both died. But in the end, it was still hard to calm down. to cultivate Li Tianlan, to teach him the unique skills of the Li family, to push him to the front, to let the purgatory of Heaven Capital escort him, to let him enter the Wang family of Beihai, to put him in the teeth of the storm. This was Li Tianlan in another space-time. If it weren't for the appearance of Samsara Palace, this would be what Li Tianlan had experienced now. For more than 20 years, was this a premeditated use from the very beginning? Or was it a betrayal with guilt, but no regrets at some times? Qin Weibai bit her lip tightly. From beginning to end, there was only Li Tianlan in her heart, and only Li Tianlan. She didn't have a good impression of the Li family from beginning to end. She couldn't wait to kill Li Kuang-tu. As for Huawu, the Samsara Palace had already cut him into pieces the moment his whereabouts were confirmed. Qin Weibai also had mixed feelings about Li Honghe. He condensed all the death qi accumulated by the Li family over the years into Li Tianlan, which made his birth destiny show signs of early death. But it was also because of him that he cultivated the man who made her fall in love with him for more than a lifetime. She had convinced herself more than once to understand that Li Honghe had no choice but to condense the death qi, but she always hated the old man more than she respected him. She changed Li Tianlan's birth destiny and helped him get the Li family. She felt that she should be even with Li Honghe. But today, when everything became clear, she suddenly felt that Li Honghe had died so easily. But she couldn't tell Li Tianlan about all of this. What could she say? That the Li family, which was sacred to him, betrayed or used him in another time and space. That the mission that went deep into his soul since he was a child and the entanglement with Li Kuang-tu was just a joke. That his grandfather, who had lived with him since he was a child and was like a lighthouse to him, betrayed him? For Li Tianlan, these things were meaningless, because none of these things had happened. But for Qin Weibai, these were all real things that had happened. So Li Tianlan couldn't understand her hatred for the Li family. No one could understand it. Li Kuang-tu looked at Qin Weibai quietly. At this moment, even he felt a little strange about his mentality. This was it could be said to be a feeling of caution. In his sight, Qin Weibai lowered her head, motionless and calm, but she gave Li Kuang-tu an extremely terrible feeling. It seemed that all his instincts were reminding him that this woman could not be provoked in such a state. After a full 5 minutes, Qin Weibai took a deep breath and reached out to open a storage compartment in the center of the hibernation chamber. She took out a stack of documents and handed them to Li Kuang-tu. She said expressionlessly, "Can you understand it?" Li Kuang-tu took a look and frowned slightly. There were all kinds of data in the documents, and some symbols that he couldn't understand, but they should represent various parts of the body and even blood cells. Countless data and symbols were neatly arranged with a kind of beauty. Li Kuang-tu looked at them silently. This was something that he cared about very much. But this time, these data were very clear and dull in his eyes. He flipped through them casually, and his eyes became a little dull. From beginning to end, he didn't look at Dongcheng Rushi lying in the hibernation chamber. Dongcheng Rushi in the hibernation chamber. You're really a beast. Qin Weibai raised the corner of her mouth, revealing a touch of undisguised contempt and disgust. I don't think I did anything wrong, Li Kuang-tu said calmly. In my heart, it's your Samsara Palace that killed my 2 children. Huawu is dead, and Moon God is gone. He threw the documents back into the storage compartment of the hibernation chamber, pointed to Dongcheng Rushi inside, and said calmly, "So, who is she?" Before Qin Weibai answered, he had already shook his head. "She's not my daughter. Since she has nothing to do with your Li family, then from now on, Emperor Dong's palace has no relationship with you and the purgatory of Heaven Capital. From now on, we are enemies," Qin Weibai said slowly. Li Kuang-tu's face changed. He suddenly felt that this sentence was a little familiar, as if he had heard it somewhere just now. When he heard it last time, he didn't have any feelings in his heart. But now this sentence came out of Qin Weibai's mouth, and his heart sank for no reason. "What do you mean?" Li Kuang-tu's eyes were sharp. Qin Weibai raised her hand and gently knocked on the hibernation chamber beside her. There was no emotion in her voice. "So, It was Li Honghe who did something to Rushi. Li Kuangte frowned. Li Yueshun, Dongcheng Rushi, two personalities. Qin Weibai said blandly, for many people in Zhongzhou State, Dongcheng Rushi is no stranger. She is the second miss of the Dongcheng clan, Tianlan's fiancée, a genius of Jade Pool, and has many titles. But how many people know Li Yueshun? Split personality, this is Rushi's secret. But in fact, is this really Rushi's secret? Or is it Li Yueshun's secret? Split personality. Different personalities are also divided into primary and secondary. Each personality will have some defects more or less. Rushi's behavior has always been a little strange. In today's words, she is a little too silly and cute. Her mind is full of Tianlan, and she is too simple. What kind of family is the Dongcheng clan? It is the top wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. Rushi grew up in such an environment. Even if Dongcheng Wudi protected her too much and didn't let her contact too much, her personality should not be so pure. This kind of purity has become the defect of Rushi's personality. On the contrary, Li Yueshun is completely different from Rushi. She is proud, reserved, cold, scheming, and excellent at acting. Everyone who knows these two names thinks that Li Yueshun is the secondary personality of Rushi. But in fact, the truth is the opposite, right? Qin Weibai looked at Li Kuangtu. Li Yueshun is the real primary personality, and Rushi should not exist. Is it the secondary personality that you created to stabilize the Dongcheng clan? Li Kuangtu was silent. Qin Weibai continued, if this is a kind of technology in the spiritual domain, then we have to admit that this technology can be said to be the top technology in the spiritual domain, or it can be called a unique skill. Its status is absolutely no less than the status of 24 moves of sword in kendo. It splits a person's spirit through a lot of spiritual hints, hides the real primary personality, and lets the secondary personality control the body for a long time, but can keep the primary personality from losing itself. Qin Weibai laughed and said, the Li family rarely has such fancy things, but it's really amazing. I always thought that you used the vitality of the dragon vein to reshape your martial arts foundation when you were dormant in East Island. If someone hadn't told me, I wouldn't even know that your martial arts foundation has not been restored. Your current combat capability comes from your will, which is an alternative burst of spiritual power. You've treated your willpower as a new martial path. So even though we're both traversing mountains in the spiritual realm, our paths are different. I can't do it like you, and you can't do it like me either. You can't even hypnotize an ordinary person. She looked at Li Kuangtu's expression. So, you can't stimulate Li Yueshun and make her have a secondary personality. So, Rushi's split personality was done by Li Honghe? Li Kuangtu chuckled. You know Moon God very well? Qin Weibai looked at Li Kuangtu, and her whole person became colder. No, she really knew him too well. It was a close relationship that had been together for many years. But that was another Li Yueshun. But they were all the same. They were the same person. So she knew more about Li Yueshun's comprehensiveness, compared with Dongcheng Rushi's purity. Li Yueshun's performance was more like a daughter of a rich family who had been raised in a rich family. But it was also a tragedy. At the end of that life, even though she was controlled by Gu Xingyun, she still left something behind. If Dongcheng Huangtu could see those things, at least he would have made sufficient preparations. Dongcheng Huangtu was killed by her. Qin Weibai couldn't deny this. But if the things she secretly left behind could be seen by Dongcheng Huangtu, at least it was possible to change the result of that time. At least, the final aftermath should not be so tragic. Those things she left behind were not difficult to find. Since it was an emergency, she naturally stayed in the place where Dongcheng Huangtu could easily see her. But in fact, when Dongcheng Huangtu walked into the encirclement alone, she already knew that he did not find those things she left behind. And after he died, the Dongcheng clan was destroyed, and she took revenge. The tragic scenes also prove that the things she left behind had disappeared before Dongcheng Huangtu walked into the encirclement. She left those things. Dongcheng Huangtu did not see them. There was only one person who was most likely to destroy those things. That was even the only suspect. It was not Dongxing Rushi. It was Li Yueshan. Perhaps it was because Li Yueshan destroyed a lot of things in advance. After Dongsheng Huangdi died, the secondary personality was stimulated by this news and completely turned on the primary personality. Li Yueshan went completely crazy and jumped from the tall building in Huading when Qin Weibai wanted to kill her. That red dress also became the most tragic color in Huading that day. The Li family should have expected the counterattack of the secondary personality. After all, it was impossible to say that there would be no consequences for forcibly splitting a complete spirit through a large number of spiritual hints and instilling two completely different ideas. When the two ideas broke out completely and conflicted, madness was an absolutely foreseeable ending. The Li family knew this, but the Li family didn't care. This sword, which had been left in the Dongchang clan since childhood, destroyed all the escape routes at the most critical moment, destroyed the family that raised her, and sacrificed her future. It was just a father she had not seen many times since she was a child, and her brother. Ridiculous, right? If there were flaws in the primary personality, it was Li Yueshan's biggest one. A primary personality that had been forcibly instilled with ideas and even enslaved. A grandmaster in the spiritual field was best at playing with people's spirits and even souls. So at that time in Snow Country, when she was with her and Flaming Fire, the two Qin Weibai did not hesitate to join hands and directly erase Li Yueshan's personality. From that time on, the Li family's plan on Dongsheng Rushi no longer existed. Dongxing Rushi was just Dongxing Rushi. She might just be a false personality created by stimulation, but from that moment on, she had become extremely real. It was also from that time on that Qin Weibai completely confirmed the fact that Li Yueshan was the primary personality. Otherwise, to erase a secondary personality, it would not have been so difficult for the two of them to join hands. Answer my question. Qin Weibai's voice was cold. It's not as dark as you said. Li Quangtu shook his head. Although I would like to say that it was done by that old bastard, if he were still alive, maybe there would be some scenes between him and Li Tianlan that I would like to see. But he is dead, so it doesn't make sense to say so. The two personalities of Moon God and Rushi were done by me. The spiritual field is the same as martial arts. They're different paths, and I can make the decisions. That old bastard is a guru in the spiritual field, and in the spiritual field, the Lin clan is the real expert, and the Li family is naturally not bad. That old bastard can go to that height. How can I be inferior to him? It's just that I never showed it at that time. When I woke up in East Island after being seriously injured, my foundation was completely destroyed. The dragon vein only guaranteed my survival. It's not impossible to rebuild my foundation, but it's difficult to return to the peak state. So I simply gave up that path. At that time, I had already gone far in the spiritual field, and my original idea was to imitate the old man in the Holy Land. Rushi and Moon God were split from me at that time. As for later, I accidentally found another path in the spiritual field, and that's how I am now. Qin Weibai listened in silence. Hearing that it was not Li Honghe who did it, she did not feel relieved or happy at all. This could only mean that what happened to Dongsheng Huangdi was not Li Honghe's planned use, but a temporary betrayal. It was also damning and unforgivable. Moon God is indeed the main personality. Li Quangtu continued, only she is my daughter. Dongxing Rushi is just a disguise. Now, you erase my real daughter and left a disguise here. Li Quangtu's eyes gradually turned cold. What is this? Whatever you want. Qin Weibai said blandly. As I said, since you think Rushi is not your daughter, then you and Emperor Dong's palace will no longer have any feelings. She raised her wrist and looked at the time on her watch. Have you finished reading? If you have, then get out. From today on, you and the purgatory of Heaven Capital are my mortal enemies. I have no feelings for the Li family. As I said just now, all the people of the Li family deserve to die. Li Honghe, you Li Huo, Li Moon God, and even other people of the Li family standing beside you all deserve to die. I'm very grateful that you didn't join Emperor Dong's palace. In that case, you can all go to hell. She paused and sneered. Get out of here so that I can send all of you to hell. Chapter 1273. Li Kuan-Tu's face changed. His expression suddenly became extremely unsightly. Qin Weibai's sneer was extremely cold, like an icy wind in the polar region, chilling to the bone, revealing a deep chill. He could hear the pleasure in Qin Weibai's voice, and it was really mixed with a touch of gratitude and gratification. The choice he made today seemed to be the choice that Qin Weibai extremely expected him to make. He did not join Emperor Dong's palace and became the first deputy palace master, which made Qin Weibai very satisfied. Because in this way, when she dealt with him and the purgatory of Heaven Capital in the future, she would be more satisfied. The corners of Li Kuan-Tu's mouth kept twitching. Not long ago, Li Tianlan had said that they were enemies from today on, but Li Kuan-Tu did not care about this sentence at all. He believed that he and Li Tianlan had a tacit understanding, because they both regarded everything that each other had now as their own future property. Li Kuan-Tu wanted Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan wanted purgatory of Heaven Capital. They were all confident that they could get it as long as they wanted it. Since it was their own property, they naturally did not want to hurt it now. So their hostility was only aimed at each other, nothing else. But Qin Weibai was different, completely different. Becoming Qin Weibai's mortal enemy and becoming Emperor Dong's and Li Tianlan's mortal enemy were two completely different concepts. And Qin Weibai said it very clearly. She was grateful not only that he did not join Emperor Dong's palace, but also that the old people of the Li family who stood beside him did not join Emperor Dong's palace. She wanted to send everyone to hell. What did this mean? Maybe there would still be a tacit understanding between Li Tianlan and Li Kuan-Tu. But such a tacit understanding did not work with Qin Weibai. As long as he left Emperor Dong's palace today, the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital would suffer the cruelest revenge of Qin Weibai in the shortest time. What was Qin Weibai's status in the dark world? Not to mention that Li Kuan-Tu already knew that although Qin Weibai had no force, her spiritual domain was infinitely close to the transcendent realm. Even before that, he had to brace himself to deal with her series of counterattacks after offending this woman. If Qin Weibai really insisted on revenge, or even destroying the purgatory of Heaven Capital, could the current purgatory of Heaven Capital stop her? As soon as this question emerged in his mind, it became another question. If Qin Weibai really insisted on using the resources of Emperor Dong's palace to destroy the purgatory of Heaven Capital, would Li Tianlan agree? The problem continued to change. Even if Li Tianlan and Qin Weibai quarreled and disagreed with her to destroy the purgatory of Heaven Capital, if Qin Weibai insisted on doing so, the military counselor who controlled the Flourishing Age Fund and the chief administrative officer of Emperor Dong's palace would listen to Li Tianlan. Or should he listen to Qin Weibai? A large part of Emperor Dong's palace's industry came from the Samsara Palace, and the main force was the Flourishing Age Fund and the Saints Mount Shu force. If things developed to the point where military counselor had to make a choice, what would Li Tianlan do? These questions popped up one by one, and they were answered immediately. With the current strength of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, it was difficult to resist. Li Kuan-Tu gave Qin Weibai a deep look. She stood in front of the hibernation chamber and quietly looked at Dongsheng Rushi, who was sleeping in the hibernation chamber. Her delicate and sharp-side face was cold and full of killing intent. Li Kuan-Tu suddenly felt a little flustered. There was another emotion that was more strange than flustered. Do you hate the Li family so much? Li Kuan-Tu laughed. There was no bitterness, self-mockery, or sarcasm in his voice, but with an indescribable taste. There were many meanings behind this sentence. Even if Li Tianlan was not a member of the Li family, he was still called Li Tianlan. He was the heir of the Li family that Li Honghe had cultivated for many years and designated. Li Honghe had handed over everything of the Li family to Li Tianlan. What else were you dissatisfied with? We, the purgatory of Heaven Capital, do have bad intentions towards Li Tianlan, but we haven't succeeded until now. We didn't even take advantage of Li Tianlan. You killed my son and my daughter. Where did your inexplicable hatred come from? These were Li Kuang-tu's heartfelt words. All the words that could not be said were in this seemingly simple sentence. So the inexplicable taste in Li Kuang-tu's words turned out to be grievance. It was the powerlessness after anger and grievance. This was a state of mind that Li Kuang-tu had never experienced, and it was also an emotion that had never appeared in his life. Even when Li Shi stabbed him in the chest with a sword, he had never felt wronged. Qin Weibai did not speak. No one would understand her grievance and annoyance. In this case, it was meaningless to say it. She took 2 steps to the side and came to another hibernation chamber. In the hibernation chamber, Situ Wanjia, who was short and thin and seemed to be wrapped in countless bubbles, was also sleeping. His face had recovered a little ruddy, and the rhythm of his breathing seemed to be more obvious than Dongqing Rushi's. In half a year, and most a year, he will wake up completely and gradually recover his combat capability. I don't know if you know that when he was in Snow Country, he had already broken through the limit. When he really recovers, no one in the dark world can be his opponent except Tianlan. At that time, Tribulation will be our deputy palace master. In your purgatory of heaven capital, even if Tianlan doesn't show up, Tribulation and several other deputy palace masters can completely destroy your property. Qin Weibai smiled softly. The light of the hibernation chamber was flickering slowly. The faint smile on her face bloomed slightly in the light and shadow, with a touch of soul-stirring coldness and determination. Get out of here. Go back and count your last days. Enjoy your life. There is not much time left for you. Li Kuang-tu was furious. Qin Weibai tilted her head and thought for a moment. She continued with a smile. During this time, you'd better struggle well. Contact all the allies you can contact, and use all the power you can use. Don't be too obedient, or I will feel bored. Purgatory of Heaven Capital, Daybreak, Dawn, Phoenix, and that little Huo. Ha ha. At that time, I won't even leave a blade of grass for you in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Amidst the shrill laughter, endless madness and resentment seemed to have materialized and surged forward, bringing with it a bone-chilling fear. Li Kuang-tu clenched his fists and said in a deep voice, "You are forcing me." Qin Weibai looked at him coldly and said nothing. Li Kuang-tu sneered. Don't you know what the composition of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital is now? How many of them want to come to Emperor Dong's palace, but have been hesitating? If I take your words back, do you think they will still have a choice? Shouldn't I thank you? Qin Weibai looked at Li Kuang-tu quietly. Her gaze was indifferent, but it was incomparably profound. Li Kuang-tu's breath stopped slightly. Qin Weibai's faint voice rang in his ear. Do you think I will care? So far, many people in the Li family have not done anything wrong to Li Tianlan. You, Qin Weibai directly interrupted Li Kuang-tu's voice and said resolutely, "This is what the Li family owes me." Li Kuang-tu suddenly didn't know what to say. He suddenly wanted to know, when Li Tianlan faced him, did he also have this kind of mentality of not being able to say anything clearly? No, Qin Weibai was even worse. Because she was a woman. Don't reason with women. Don't reason with angry women. Don't try to reason with a woman who has a strong personality and great power. So Li Kuang-tu, who didn't know what to say, wisely kept silent and didn't say a word. Do you need to give you some time alone? Qin Weibai walked back again and looked at Dongqing Rushi in the hibernation cabin. Her voice was cold. No need. Li Kuang-tu said blandly, "Goodbye." Without any hesitation, Qin Weibai turned directly and walked to the elevator exit. The lights in the rest and reception area of the laboratory were still on. Vaguely, there was a voice coming over. It was in high spirits and was talking incessantly. Qin Weibai frowned. I tell you, things like poison are actually more useful than martial arts when used properly. Tianlan is now invincible in the world. If Wang Tianzong doesn't show up, he is almost no opponent. The first on the divine list, at his age, is really amazing. But what about Wang Tianzong, not to mention Tianlan? As long as I'm fully prepared, as long as there is a suitable opportunity, I can directly destroy a city in the shortest time. How about it? The heavenly sun is invincible and supreme, but how long will it take him to kill all the people in a city? If I play with poison, in fact, it only takes a short time to finish what these martial arts masters take a long time to do. What the hell? Just kill them. Why are you thinking about all these messy things? If you can directly kill people, why do you have to destroy buildings? If the building is broken, won't you build it? No. Why do you keep thinking about this? I'm talking about poison. I mean killing people. I'm not talking about destroying other things. It's good that I can kill people. You can't expect me to turn over a building with poison, can you? Do you really want to turn over a building with poison? Is there something wrong with your head? Oh no? You should have said it earlier. We can't talk about this anymore. What a mess. Can a star be poisoned? Well, then tell me, who is a star? Why are the young people nowadays so strange? Didn't you talk about the fastest way to kill people at the beginning? Why do you keep talking about destroying buildings? Are you engaged in demolition? Yu Donglai's excited voice continued to come. He had been in the rest area. Qin Weibai and Li Quanta knew this. But it was just Yu Donglai himself in the rest area. Who was still there? Young people? Qin Weibai frowned and subconsciously quickened her pace. She suddenly realized something was wrong. The biological laboratory in Emperor Dong's palace was an important and hidden place. There were only a few young people in the whole Emperor Dong's palace who could come here. Qin Weibai was one, Li Tianlan was one, Xinyuan Wushang was one, and then there was Nalan Shuriying. She was here now, and the others obviously would not talk about killing people and demolition with Yu Donglai. Qin Weibai quickened her pace and approached the rest area. At the same time, a voice that was very strange to her rang clearly from the corner of the rest room. The voice was calm, but between the lines, there were countless sharp edges crisscrossing all over the sky. Not killing people, not demolition. The voice was faint. I want to say destruction. After a pause, he continued, pure destruction. The voice was very strange. Qin Weibai's heart sank, and she went straight to the corner. In her sight, the soft lights in the rest area covered the ground. Yu Donglai, who was stunned by the question, was thinking hard about something. And sitting opposite Yu Donglai was a young man that Qin Weibai had never seen before, but he looked a little familiar. It was difficult to describe this man as handsome or not handsome. He looked about 30 years old, tall and slender, with deep eyes and angular facial features showing a very distinct toughness. He was just sitting there casually, but his almost casual sitting posture had a kind of sharpness that almost made people unable to breathe. Qin Weibai's pupils suddenly contracted to the extreme. It was not because of the momentum of this strange but somewhat familiar man. It was because he was sitting here, but the space all over his body was slightly twisted unnaturally. Pieces of blood mist were sprinkled from every corner of his body. Face, forehead, eyes, arms, an endless mist of blood filled the air around him. He seemed to be suffering terrible injuries all the time, but all the injuries healed completely the moment they appeared, and then the new wounds broke again. The process repeated endlessly. The faint smell of blood permeated the reception room. The air was full of invisible but extremely terrible edges. The man with blood mist floating all over his body seemed to feel Qin Weibai coming over. He stood up and nodded to Qin Weibai. Have you finished talking? Qin Weibai did not answer. She stared at the man in front of her with great vigilance and said word by word, "Who are you?" The blood mist was floating in front of her. The somewhat strange young man thought for a moment and said lightly, "It's not easy to explain, but I mean no harm. I also know what you want to do, so I can help you. How about I treat you and Li Quantu to a movie?" Chapter 1274. Qin Weibai didn't want to watch a movie with Li Quantu. It was a disgusting thing to think about. Therefore, the invitation was also very disgusting. Since it could make her feel disgusted, the other party naturally didn't have good intentions. Qin Weibai took a step sideways without batting an eyelid. On the wall less than 3 meters away from her, there was an inconspicuous special button. As long as this button was pressed, the entire castle of Emperor Dong's palace would be completely closed. Every room and every passage would be completely blocked by the superalloy hidden in the main body of the building, and the entire Emperor Dawn's palace would sound the alarm. In this way, Li Tianlan could find the abnormality and rush here as soon as possible. This was undoubtedly making a mountain out of a molehill. With her spiritual power that was infinitely close to the transcendent realm, few people in the dark world could hurt her. But the image of the other party was too weird, or in other words, the aura of the other party was too strong. He was about 185 meters tall and thin. He was wearing a black gown that was somewhere between ancient and modern times. Qin Weibai had never seen anyone wearing such clothes before. Instead, it was more like the clothes worn by the characters in some online games. They looked tall and slender, and they allowed people to stretch their bodies in the most comfortable state. Qin Weibai did not remember seeing anyone wearing such clothes. Countless faintly discernible patterns appeared and disappeared on the black robe, changing into different shapes. Sometimes they were like dragons that could summon the wind and rain, and sometimes they were like divine swords that filled the sky. Countless light spots constantly changed, turning into an incomparably vast battlefield. Qin Weibai was speechless. She was very familiar with the state of Heartless after he turned into the black trench coat. The countless complex and mysterious patterns on Wu Qing's body were also changing. Qin Weibai originally thought that Wu Qing was gaudy enough after it turned into clothes, but compared to the long gown on the person in front of her, it was really insignificant. But this incomparably gaudy long gown on the person in front of her was like Li Tianlan wearing Wu Qing. If it was worn by someone else, it might be a clown, but when it was worn by them, there was a touch of irresistible majesty in the dark. It was just right and complemented each other. Strictly speaking, it was like a Qin Weibai tried hard to think. The other party's words replayed in her mind once more without missing a single word. Who are you? It's hard to explain, but I mean no harm. I also know what you want to do, so I can help you. Qin Weibai's heart suddenly trembled. This kind of unintentional word was the best representation of the person's habit of referring to himself. Qin Weibai finally understood what the man's clothes looked like. Dragon robes. An emperor's dragon robe that was not recorded in the history books and was completely different from any era? What the hell was this? Qin Weibai suddenly felt a little absurd. This was Emperor Dong's palace, the most secret biological laboratory in Emperor Dong's palace. It was a secret place where almost no one could enter. There were only her, Li Kuang-tu, and Yu Donglai here. Anyone who wanted to enter this place had to inform her in advance. But now, there was suddenly such a guy in a dragon robe who claimed to be the emperor appeared here inexplicably, said that he wanted to help him, and even invited him to watch a movie with Li Kuang-tu. Qin Weibai shook her head subconsciously. She looked so adorable that she suddenly doubted the authenticity of the scene in front of her. However, she was a master in the spiritual realm, so she was very sure that she had not been hypnotized. He was not dreaming either. That was because she only had one dream left, and that was the boundless and boundless Milky Way. The man in the dragon robe stood quietly. His figure was vividly reflected in Qin Weibai's sight and in her spiritual domain. She could feel the reality of the man and even observe the abnormality of his body. The blood mist, which would gush out of his body at any time, quietly filled the air. The smell of blood was not pungent, but it had an unimaginable vicissitude and heaviness. Qin Weibai could even feel that thousands or even tens of thousands of tiny cracks appeared on his body every minute and second. The moment the blood mist gushed out of those wounds, all the wounds healed in an instant, then broke again and healed again, endlessly. A faint blood mist bloomed from his body from time to time, and his incomparably real figure also seemed a little blurred. Qin Weibai stared at him closely and took another step to the side. The man did not respond, just looked at her very gently. He seemed to have long been accustomed to the wounds that raged inside and outside his body, so he did not feel any pain. There was even a little smile in his eyes. Qin Weibai was sure that she had never seen this man before, but for some reason, the more she looked at him, the more familiar he seemed, like some scenery that flashed across the depths of her memory. But such a man should be deeply impressed once she saw him. But if she had never seen him before, then where did this familiar feeling come from? His angular, sharp, and rigid face might not be handsome or beautiful, but it could definitely be called handsome. In other words, it was a kind of dazzling valiance. Qin Weibai glanced at Yu Donglai calmly. She and Yu Donglai had been friends for many years. They had known each other before Li Tianlan entered the secular world. Many of the Li family's branches were contacted by Qin Weibai through him, so Qin Weibai had absolute trust in the old man's character. An inexplicable person suddenly entered the forbidden area of Emperor Dong's palace. Qin Weibai believed that Yu Donglai would not be unaware of the seriousness of the matter, but he could still chat with the other party in high spirits. What was this? Qin Weibai asked directly, "Who is he?" Yu Donglai looked down at the fruit plate and ate with relish, as if he did not hear Qin Weibai's voice at all. He frowned and seemed to be thinking about something. Qin Weibai slightly gritted her teeth, suddenly took a step to the side, and reached out to press the button. The button fell down, but the expected vibration and alarm did not happen. The biological laboratory of Emperor Dong's palace was still quiet. Qin Weibai suddenly turned her head and looked at the young man in the dragon robe beside her. There was no panic on her face, only a kind of coldness that people did not dare to look at directly. Countless wounds on the young man's body were torn and healed at a nearly constant speed. There was undisguised appreciation in his eyes. "Your Highness is indeed an outstanding beauty. Even your temperament is extremely admirable. I don't want to hear nonsense." Qin Weibai's voice was indifferent. The young man was silent for a second and said quietly, "Then let's get down to business." He thought for a moment and laughed. "I want to say that I am actually passing by. Do you believe me?" Qin Weibai's expression did not change. "I heard your conversation with him," Gu Shiju said. The young man said slowly, "I know what you want, but what you have done is not enough. Your current spiritual power has not reached the level where you can hypnotize Li Kuang-tu. What you could do now is to give him some spiritual hints when he is in a weak state. But as he leaves here, his injury will gradually improve, and these spiritual hints will not play a very obvious role." Qin Weibai's expression changed. Why was she here? Just to talk nonsense with Li Kuang-tu? Qin Weibai was not in the mood for this. The real reason was just as the young man said. She took advantage of Li Kuang-tu's current low state, and when his will was cracked, to give him some spiritual hints. If Li Kuang-tu was in his heyday, Qin Weibai could not do anything to him in the spiritual field. Now it could be said that it was her only chance. First, she created enough pressure on Li Kuang-tu, and then slowly channeled this pressure in another direction to achieve the goal she wanted. Qin Weibai didn't know if this method would work, but there was no harm in giving it a try. "I can help you," the young man said lightly. The patterns on his black dragon robe flickered and combined into the shape of several flying dragons, which were vivid and vivid. Qin Weibai thought for a moment and said calmly, "You also know hypnosis? The transcendent realm? I don't know those fancy things." The young man laughed, and there was a touch of disdain in his tone. "I have only one way. Then how will you help me?" Qin Weibai frowned. "Hypnosis is too fake, and spiritual hints are too weak. You can obviously speak with facts. Why do you have to be so troublesome?" The young man turned his eyes in another direction. Li Kuang-tu had appeared there. Meeting the young man's eyes, Li Kuang-tu also looked at him in a daze. He was not surprised by the sudden appearance of another person here, but just looked at him quietly. His eyes were a little dazed, with intimacy and a kind of pure longing and yearning. If the perspective of Li Kuang-tu and Qin Weibai was presented on the canvas, everything they saw now was the same but different. It was also the extremely heroic man in the dragon robe. In Qin Weibai's sight, there were wounds and blood mist that were tearing and healing all over his body all the time. In Li Kuang-tu's view, there were the crisscrossing sharpness and sword light all over the sky. The sharpest and sharpest power between heaven and earth all gathered around him, whistling wantonly in his every move. Li Kuang-tu didn't know him either, But it didn't matter whether he knew him or not. He didn't think about who the other party was at all. The Li family practiced swordsmanship. Even though Li Kuang-tu was actually a guru in the spiritual field, his path was still the path of the Li family. In his eyes, the man in front of him was swordsmanship and martial arts. Supremacy. The man in the dragon robe took 2 steps toward Li Kuang-tu, glanced at him, and nodded. His talent is not bad, but he has gone astray. How many people in the world were qualified to evaluate Li Kuang-tu's path? But hearing this, Li Kuang-tu was in a daze and didn't refute at all. The man continued to speak. Do you believe me? Li Kuang-tu's whole body shook. Almost without any hesitation, he nodded in a low posture that he didn't even realize. He said softly, Of course I believe you. Li Kuang-tu had practiced swordsmanship and martial arts all his life. If he didn't believe in swordsmanship or martial arts, it was impossible for him to have such achievements. Faced with this question, he couldn't say that he didn't believe him. The man nodded with satisfaction and looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai was also watching him with vigilance in her eyes. She didn't know martial arts, so naturally, she couldn't feel any intimacy. She only saw the blood mist constantly drifting around the man. Is there anything you can't let go? He asked suddenly. Qin Weibai shook her head, slightly at a loss. Can't let go. The only thing she couldn't let go of in this life was Li Tianlan. But Li Tianlan had already stood at the top of the world. He was the heavenly son of this era. He was invincible in the world. He ranked first on the divine list, and Emperor Dong's palace also became the most powerful superpower in the world. According to the current momentum, Emperor Dong's palace would become a real dynasty in 5 or 10 years at most. What else couldn't he let go? A smile appeared on the man's face, and he said patiently, Think about it. If you are her, and she is you, then you must have something you can't let go but can't say. After all, the illusion in other people's eyes is real in your hearts. You are her. She is you. Can't let go illusion. Real. Qin Weibai suddenly opened her eyes wide, looking at the black dragon robe in front of her in disbelief, and trembling a little. The man's voice was calm and soothing. Why don't you go and see it with your own eyes? I'm sure your trip will be worthwhile. Qin Weibai vaguely realized what the so-called movie he mentioned at the beginning meant, but she couldn't believe it. The man looked at her, patiently waiting for her answer. Qin Weibai's eyes flickered. After a long time, she hesitated and gently nodded. The man laughed. Then let's go. He raised his arm, and the wide black cuffs suddenly shook. On the majestic and mysterious black dragon robe, countless patterns were constantly flashing. Flying dragons crisscrossed, sword light filled the sky. The sun and the moon crossed the sky, and a vast sword energy broke out directly with the man as the center. In terms of destruction, this sword light did not have any power at all. However, it was incomparably vast and boundless. The soft light in the biological laboratory disappeared completely. The touch of the wall also became nothingness. There was only darkness in front of Qin Weibai and Li Kuang-tu. There was only darkness. The man in the black dragon robe was gone. Countless times and distances flashed in a hurry in a trance, moving forward or backward. Faintly, some ethereal voices of dialogue sounded in the depths of the darkness. Gu Xingyun died. Do you think it's only Gu Xingyun who died? Your Majesty the Mikado. Kunlun City. Kunlun City speak. It's Kunlun City. The Gu family in Zhongzhou State was exterminated last night. 307 people of the Gu family, including Gu Xingyun and Gu Qianquan, were all dismembered. It's said that woman did it. Are you sure? How could it be possible? How could she be so strong? She can't do it alone. What if she adds that sword? That woman is crazy. She's completely crazy. Is she taking revenge? It's ridiculous. She killed that person with her own hands at that time. How could she? Your Majesty, urgent news. Di Jiang of the Wang family of Beihai is dead. Your Majesty, the divine punishment troop of the Wang family of Beihai was wiped out. Your Majesty, Jifeng sword training school was slaughtered. The news is confirmed. It's really that woman. Yagyu Kurasumi was beheaded by her with one sword strike. All the people of Jifeng's sword training school, including the children, are dead. She's coming for me. Father, let's go first. Father, let's join hands. We're not necessarily afraid of that bitch. Join hands? If it's just her, I'm not afraid. But with that sword, what's the point of joining hands? Let's go. I'm Mikado of East Island. Where can I go? You can go anywhere. Even if you're not the Mikado, you still have the purgatory of Heaven Capital and a way out. That woman doesn't have much time left. The energy of that sword is not endless. As long as I'm dead, even if she wants to kill you, she can only do it after destroying the Wong family of Beihai. There's still a chance. The future of the Li family is in your hands. Remember, there's no need to risk your life to fight with a lunatic. Li Kuang-tu! A piercing scream suddenly pierced through the darkness. The darkness around him faded instantly. Li Kuang-tu's eyes lit up. In the next second, a heart-wrenching pain spread throughout his entire body. In his line of sight, a pitch-black greatsword pierced straight into his chest. At the same time, in Qin Weibai's sight, she saw herself holding a huge sword and stabbing it directly into Li Kuang-tu's heart. Chapter 1275. A familiar scene. A strange scene. The beginning of everything. The end of everything. His vision and perception became clear from the trance. There was a messy and bleak snow around him. The snow covered the mountains. The broken base was full of corpses and pieces of flesh. Internal organs and limbs were scattered everywhere. Dark red blood flowed on the white snow like a weird snake. The shocking red converged in one place and flowed along the hillside like a small river. The pain was heart-wrenching. The familiar sword energy tore every inch of the tendons and vessels in his body with terrifying energy, wantonly destroying the internal organs. Exhaustion came after the sharp pain. The wind and snow were messy all over the sky. Li Kuang-tu struggled to keep his eyes open. At the forefront of his sight was a red dress, bleak and beautiful as blood. Her black hair danced wildly in the wind and snow. This was a face that Li Kuang-tu was very familiar with, but it was also a somewhat strange face. The delicate and sharp lines of her face were as perfect as a dream. Unlike his impression of her, who most of the time wore no makeup, she had carefully put on light makeup. Her eyelashes were long, her forehead was smooth, and her lips were bright. Her hair, which had been carefully combed, was completely loose. Her face was extremely pale, which formed an incomparably dazzling contrast with the mournful red dress she was wearing. This was Qin Weibai, but it seemed not. This was an indescribable cognitive disorder. The woman in front of him seemed to have completely left only a perfect body. All feelings, desires, and souls had disappeared. The pair of eyes that always seemed very bright and deep in his impression now only had a dead silence and numbness, with only a touch of near-eternal obsession. The pain was still going on, but Li Kuang-tu's heart sank for no reason. He looked at the woman in front of him quietly. A strong and strange, but extremely pure fear seemed to completely jump out from the depths of his soul, freezing every inch of his muscles, every drop of blood, and even his thoughts and soul. It was not because the giant sword in the other party's hand had pierced his chest. In this state, Qin Weibai, who he had never seen before, gave him a kind of extreme uneasiness. In this kind of emotion, Qin Weibai seemed to take everything for granted. In the clear image, the darkness had completely faded away. Li Kuang-tu heard his own voice. Weak, hoarse, tired, twisted, and powerless. Forcefully breaking through, cough, you won't live for long. Hiha, Gu Xianyan, are you regretting it? In his sight, the woman in red raised her head stiffly and looked into his eyes blankly. Her voice was slow and hoarse. You will regret it more than me. Kacha, the huge sword that had pierced in his chest, instantly split up and turned into many exquisite little swords. The wind and snow rose and fell wildly along with the sword energy. The chaotic sword light, without any rhythm, continued to spread out with the woman in red as the center. Li Kuang-tu and Qin Weibai's vision instantly flew away. This was indeed an immersive movie, but the man who showed them the movie was not a good storyteller. Therefore, there was no foreshadowing or narration. Perhaps in the other party's heart, it was not a very important matter at all. What he wanted to do was to present all the blood and slaughter in the clearest and cruelest way before the two of them. Qin Weibai and Li Kuang-tu's vision spread to the entire base. The base was a mixture of red and white. Flowing blood, melting snow, one after another, exquisite little swords shuttled through the base with rainbow-like sword energy. The elites who were still alive in the base struggled desperately. The sword energy swept past. The crowd suddenly exploded. Yes, it exploded. Like a bomb. Flesh and blood flew all over the sky. The struggling elites became minced meat on the ground. Not to mention the original image, even the various parts could not be pieced together. The elites who were still alive in the entire base were completely wiped out by the sword energy. No one survived, and no one had a whole body. The surging sword energy spread out of the base with the wind and snow like a wave. Qin Weibai and Li Kuang-tu's vision also spread out of the base. The sword energy cut off a nearby mountain. The fleeing crowd appeared in their vision. Li Kuang-tu could not feel his body. However, his consciousness suddenly stiffened. In the fleeing crowd, familiar figures appeared in front of him one after another. Daybreak with a ferocious and resentful look. Dawn with a dignified expression. Phoenix with a deeply worried expression. Phoenix was holding a boy about 10 years old in her hand. A close-up shot of the scene was constantly changing. Li Su, who was still in charge of all the intelligence work in the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Lan, the current chief butler of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Li Yuan, the current senior guest of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. And at the back of the crowd, a young man who looked less than 30 years old. The young man was wearing a red robe with a phoenix pattern, decorated with the 12 movements representing the sun, the moon, and the stars, which were complicated and gorgeous. Although his appearance was not too outstanding, he had a kind of calmness and majesty that did not match his age. Both Qin Weibai and Li Kuang-tu knew very well what this decoration meant. This was the 12 movements and the robe with a phoenix pattern that represented the Emperor's decoration in East Island, which would only appear on one person. The Mikado of East Island. Li Kuang-tu's consciousness trembled violently. His vision was fixed on the young man in the robe with a phoenix pattern. This was not the son he remembered. Because when his son died, he was less than 20 years old. But now he was nearly 30 years old, and his facial features had lost their childishness. The complicated and gorgeous clothes were all so familiar, perfectly in line with his original plan. At the back of the crowd, the extremely young heavenly emperor of Huawu raised his arm. Memories surged in like a tidal wave. Li Kuang-tu might still be a little confused, but Qin Weibai's memory was completely awakened. She finally knew where she was. This was another time and space. Everything she was seeing now was something that had happened before, something that she had done with her own hands. This was the holy mountain of East Island, a secret base belonging to the royal family. And everything in front of her was the scene when she took ruthless revenge. The child she killed in Ninghu that year. The heavenly emperor of Huawu now. Two memories, different time and space, and the chaotic reality made her calm mind constantly distorted. She began to recall everything that happened on this day. She recalled what she once said. That day, she failed to kill the heavenly emperor of Huawu, after all. That day, a lunatic who overdrew his vitality and a long sword that overdrew his energy could be said to be truly invincible in the world. But compared with the heavenly emperor of Huawu, she had someone she wanted to kill more. The violent sword energy gathered at the moment when Huawu raised his arm. Two incomparably powerful sword chis collided in midair. The horrible sword energy swept across the area. The surrounding snow-capped mountains shook wildly, and the snow was like a landslide swirling in the air. The heavenly emperor of Huawu, who forcibly blocked the sword, was thrown into the air. Blood splashed. Before his body landed on the ground, a faint white mist began to spread all over his body. The horrible avalanche began to cover everything. The perspective of Li Kuang-tu and Qin Wei-bai seemed to become snowflakes one after another, clearly seeing the crowd under the avalanche. No, no! Li Kuang-tu roared silently, but he couldn't make any sound. From his perspective, he saw Phoenix buried in the snow and the child in his hand. The moment the snow fell, a delicate small sword had pierced through a large amount of snow, and the endless sword energy shook Phoenix and the child out. The sword light crisscrossed. From top to bottom, the edge cut through Phoenix's scalp, spine, two swords, legs, and then gently cut off the child's limbs. Blood dripped quickly, but none of the wounds were vital. The child's cry and Phoenix's scream were heart-wrenching. Their bodies, which were not dead, fell into the flying snow and were covered by the snow layer by layer. The blood and the snow mixed together, turning white with red, and finally became pure white. Another small sword pierced Dawn's eyes with sword energy and cut off his legs. Dawn, dragging half of his body, roared and wanted to fight back, but he couldn't even find his opponent. Death spread everywhere in the avalanche. People from the Li family were dying. The extremely precious Li Consortium veterans who had been preserved were tortured in extremely cruel ways until they were half dead. Then they were all buried in the snow. Among these people, Li Kuang-tu saw not only a part of the people in the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but also some people in Emperor Dong's palace. But it didn't work. Everyone received the same treatment. They were all tortured and killed by the small swords in an almost inhumane and insidious way. Li Kuang-tu's consciousness trembled violently. Extreme, paranoid, or arrogant, no matter what, he really had feelings for the Li family. This feeling was deeply engraved in his bones and soul, and it could even be said to be the driving force for him to live. He never thought that the Li family would face such a scene. People close to him were killed one by one. He was also stabbed in the heart by the madman. The Li family was withering at a speed that was close to extinction. Collapse, anger, hatred, resentment, and unwillingness. His emotions began to become extremely chaotic. In the extreme chaos, he heard the woman's voice. "You win. You win." The two voices sounded almost at the same time. One was the voice from the perspective. It was dead silent, numb, stiff, and slow. The other was beside him. It was a little complicated, a little nostalgic, and with pleasure. Why could Qin Wei-bai speak? Li Kuang-tu wanted to turn around, but he couldn't feel his body. There was no one in his perception, because he was watching a movie. He was there, so he naturally couldn't see another person outside the movie. Then he heard his own voice again, crazy, hoarse, with resentment and pleasure. "I will die, but the Li family will not die. I will die, but the Li family will not be destroyed. Ha ha! Ahem! Li Tianlan has fallen. You killed him, but you failed to kill Huawu today. The Li family is mine. It belongs to Huawu. It belongs to the people of the Li family. Ha! I want to thank you. Thank you for killing that bastard." The moment the scream suddenly sounded, Li Kuang-tu felt pain again. He saw the woman in red stretch out her hands and gouge out his eyes. But this was a movie. He could still see the picture. He saw himself with blood spurting out of his eyes. The voice beside him sounded again, almost murmuring, "I don't like your eyes. Your eyes. I don't like them. I wanted to do this a long time ago." The madwoman in red murmured and threw the two eyeballs aside. Li Kuang-tu saw his expression completely distorted, becoming extremely ferocious and crazier at the same time. "You killed him. Li Tianlan, Dongcheng Huang-tu, you killed him, you killed him, you killed him." Swish! An arm flew directly into the air. You killed him. You killed him. You killed him." His vitality was fading rapidly. Li Kuang-tu, who was furious, began to vent his resentment like crazy. He knew what words could irritate the madwoman in front of him the most, so he kept repeating them. Another arm flew into the air. then the feet, calf, knee, thigh. The internal organs were scattered on the ground after being cut at the waist. The heart had been pierced. Even the vitality of the peak of the invincible realm was rapidly disappearing at this time. The completely crazy woman didn't stop. She held the reassembled giant sword in her hand and stabbed his upper body again and again, tearing his face, mouth, and throat. Blood splashed everywhere. Li Kwangtu was dead. He was like a machine. It was dismantled into pieces by the woman who had completely gone mad. From the beginning to the end, the woman's expression and eyes didn't change at all. They were numb and dead. It wasn't until Li Kwangtu was completely dead that she suddenly laughed while standing in the broken bodies on the ground. The laughter was sharp and hollow, like crying, but also like laughing. She was really crazy. The mountain was covered with snow. The mountain was covered with blood. Li Kwangtu's consciousness watched silently. He seemed to have entered the cold winter and the abyss, wrapped in the cold. The bloody and cruel pictures were playing in a loop in silence. The darkness swallowed him again. The voice was still one step ahead of the light. Where are the children? How could you two lose sight of two children who are only a few years old together? In the voice with hidden anger, some vague light tore the darkness. Li Kwangtu saw a somewhat familiar young face. He was not familiar because he had never spoken to him. He looked familiar because Li Kwangtu had been paying attention to him. In today's Zhongzhou state, outside of movies, this young man was not very famous. But in the eyes of real people, he could definitely be said to be one of the most important young people in Zhongzhou state. Lin Yuxian of the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian in the picture was different from Li Kwangtu's impression. He seemed to have not left the Lin clan. So compared with Lin Yuxian of Emperor Dawn's palace, who was calm and tactful, he was more wanton and casual now. Li Kwangtu knew the place in the picture. It should be a 5-star hotel in Huading, one of the few properties of the Lin clan in Huading. He had stayed there for a few days. Li Kwangtu didn't understand what it meant. He just quietly watched the movie in front of him. Qin Weibai's mood obviously began to fluctuate violently. Don't worry, young master. Don't worry, young master. We are looking for them. Within 3 days, we promise to find the 2 children. You bastards! What are you doing every day? You can't even look after the 2 children. Useless. What the hell is going on? Tell me. Young master, the 2 children were brought back by the patriarch. He told us to take good care of them. He would bring them back to the headquarters after he finished his work. We don't know the origin of the children, but in the morning, a woman suddenly came and said that she wanted to see her children. What kind of woman? I can't describe it. A very beautiful woman. No, a woman who looked perfect. She wore red clothes and carried a sword on her back. Young master, the woman's mental state was very abnormal. She looked like a lunatic. She didn't say a few words, but she had already injured several security guards. Then she rushed in. She was so fast that we couldn't stop her. At that time, the whole hotel was looking for the woman. The situation was too chaotic. The 2 children also ran out at that time. It was the elder sister who pulled the younger brother. Lin Yuxian was silent for a moment. His expression became colder and colder. In the morning? It's night now. The children were lost in the morning. How far can they run? You have been looking for them all day, but you still haven't found them? Go and find them. What are you standing here for? Go and find them. If you can't find them, don't come back. Late at night, in the outer suburbs where the neon lights of Huading could not reach, the garbage dump was full of moonlight. The little figure was rummaging carefully in the garbage dump. The air of the midsummer night was hot with dullness. Under the bright moonlight, it was the figure of a little girl. She looked to be at most 5 or 6 years old. Her body was thin and weak, and her clothes were dirty. Sweat flowed down her face. Her eyes were wide open, and her small hand was holding half a piece of dusty bread. Her action of rummaging through the trash was serious and persistent. The garbage made a slight sound in the process of being rummaged. After a long time, the little girl whispered, squatted down, moved a small half of the watermelon in the garbage dump, and took out a carton of milk that had been mostly drunk. She stretched out her hand and wiped the straw on the milk carton hard. Then she took a small sip carefully. The milk seemed to have been thrown away not long ago, so it did not go bad. The girl held the bread and the milk in her arms. She smiled with some joy. It was very sweet. She raised the hard bread in her hand and took a bite. She held the half carton of milk in her arms and was ready to turn away. "Can't you drink the thing in your arms?" A somewhat gentle voice sounded. The girl was startled. She really jumped up. She instinctively protected the milk, opened her eyes wide, and looked ahead vigilantly. A middle-aged man who looked to be in his 50s stood there. His body was as stiff as a statue. His clothes were neat, and his temples were gray, but his appearance was elegant. Although he was no longer young, he still exuded a kind of carefree and casual aura. Wave after wave of sword chi spread out in all directions with him as the center, covering the entire junkyard and several dilapidated houses near the junkyard. The sword chi sensed everything. Finally, in a small room, he sensed the baby who was biting his finger. The middle-aged man breathed a sigh of relief, and his whole body seemed to relax all of a sudden. He slowly took a few steps forward and approached the little girl. The little girl held the milk and instinctively retreated, but she seemed to think of something and stopped again. She just opened her eyes and asked, "Are you here to catch me?" She could barely remember things at her age. She knew that many people were now trying to catch her, but during this period of time, the number of people catching her seemed to have decreased. "Someone is catching you?" The middle-aged man was stunned. The girl nodded and said softly, "Yes, I was almost caught by them once. I ran to a crowded place. Many uncles and aunties helped me, and the bad guys were scared away." She looked up at him and said, "Where are you going to take me?" Her big eyes were filled with tears, and she was a little desperate. She said with a sobbing tone, "I'll go with you. I'm not here to catch you." The middle-aged man sighed softly and touched the girl's head. "I've been looking for you for almost half a year, and I've finally found you. I'll take you home." Children might not be able to distinguish right from wrong, but they could feel pure kindness and malice. The girl stared at him for a while, and her body slowly relaxed. The man reached out to grab the half carton of milk that the girl was holding tightly. He pulled but did not move. He was slightly stunned. The girl was a little nervous again. She hesitated and whispered, "Milk. Brother wants to drink it." According to her experience, this small half carton of milk and some breadcrumbs on the soft part of the bread were enough for her brother to eat for a day. The middle-aged man, who was used to all kinds of tragedies, suddenly felt a lump in his throat. He forced a smile and said, "It's okay. I found the best nanny." Although he said that, he did not grab the half carton of milk that represented food in the girl's heart. He squatted down, looked at the girl, and said softly, "Do you remember me?" The girl looked at him blankly and shook her head slightly. "Your aunt asked me to take care of you and your brother. Half a year ago, I put you in a hotel and said that I would take you home in a few days. Do you remember? How did you get out later?" The middle-aged man asked softly. The girl thought about it seriously and said hesitantly, "We saw my aunt. I took my brother to find my aunt. My brother wants to drink milk." She seemed to have thought of something and looked at the middle-aged man happily. "Where's my aunt?" The middle-aged man's eyes became extremely complicated. He reached out to touch the girl's head and said softly, "She went to a place far, far away." The girl blinked and said softly, "When will she come back? It will probably take a very long time, right?" The girl was silent. She vaguely realized something, but she didn't fully understand it. After a long time, she said softly, "Can you help me take care of my brother?" She was only a few years old, but she had to take care of a baby. One could imagine how difficult it was to survive. However, even in the most difficult situation, she had never thought of leaving her brother behind. She didn't understand the deep love between siblings at her age. She just instinctively felt that she couldn't leave her brother behind. "Yes, I'll take you home. I promise that I can give you the best life," the middle-aged man said seriously. The girl nodded and asked expectantly, "Does that mean I don't have to beg for food? And I don't have to cut off a leg?" The uncle said that when I grow up, I can use it. I can also cut off a leg to beg for food. They will take care of me and my brother." The middle-aged man's mouth twitched. He knew who the uncles the girl was talking about were. Before he came, he had already killed all of those scum and dismembered them. "Of course, all of you must be healthy and safe," Yizichin said. He held the girl's hand. Sword chi surged, and the two of them arrived at the shabby little room. On the little bed in the room, the baby who didn't cry or make a fuss looked at the man with his black eyes. Suddenly, he opened his mouth and smiled. The murderous sword chi and the smell of blood were still lingering around him. The baby seemed to like this atmosphere and became happier and happier. The man carefully carried the baby, looked at the girl next to him, held his little hand, and asked, "Do you still remember your names?" "I remember." The girl nodded seriously. "My name is Dong Chengyu. My brother is Li Dongcheng. Aunt said that I can never forget." The man was silent for a while, then nodded and said softly, "Then I will never forget." "Uncle, what's your name?" The girl blinked her eyes. The man smiled, touched her head, and said softly, "My name is Lin Fengting." Chapter 1276. Dad, Dad. In a small bedroom where every detail was meticulously arranged, a 3-year-old child was holding a somewhat rough wooden sword in his chubby little hand, shouting with a tender voice, "It's Godfather. Dongcheng, I'm Godfather. Call me Godfather." Lin Yuxian looked at the little boy on the bed seriously. "Good son, look at my mouth." "Ah, Godfather." The 3-year-old child looked at Lin Yuxian blankly and then nodded seriously. "Yes, yes." Lin Yuxian was speechless. He turned to look at Dongcheng Yu beside him and said seriously, Yu, do you think he's playing with me?" "I don't know, Uncle Lin." Dongcheng Yu's face was red because she was holding back her laughter. She sat at the small table in the corner of the bedroom. She was dressed in exquisite and gorgeous clothes. Her face was rosy and her eyes were shining. She looked like a little princess. She was holding the doll that Lin Yuxian had just given her in her arms. The sweet smile on her face made people's hearts tremble. "You're also a little slippery." Lin Yuxian snorted and took out the toy car behind him. "Good son, call me Godfather. If you call me Godfather, I'll give you the toy car, okay?" He moved faster and put the toy in front of the boy first. "Dad, Dad." The boy's voice was still childish. He held the wooden sword and pushed the toy car aside with some disgust. "Well, if the car doesn't like it, how about the airplane, tank, transformer, Ultraman?" Lin Yuxian chattered endlessly and was in high spirits. In recent years, he had rarely been in the headquarters of the Lin clan. He only came back a few times a year. But every time he came back, the first thing he did was to see his adopted son, and then to see his father. Then he came back to accompany his adopted son until he left again. Li Dongcheng didn't have a nickname. He just had his 3rd birthday and spoke very late. So far, he could only say a few words. But he was very flexible and walked much earlier than other children of the same age. After he was brought back to the Lin clan, different departments of the Lin clan jointly checked his body very carefully. Li Dongqing's blood had an extremely high oxygen content. Not high, but extremely high, incredibly high. At the same time, the child's spine was also very strong, which could connect the limbs to the greatest extent. Furthermore, his body's coordination and balance were unbelievable. All of this was visible to the naked eye. This child did not inherit his father's wind and thunder veins. But from a certain point of view, he could be considered to have a unique constitution that had never appeared before. It could even be said that this child had an unprecedented talent for martial arts. His spine was so tough that current biological knowledge could not explain it. This meant that his future path of martial arts would not encounter any bottlenecks. What is a bottleneck? That was because of the body. Even if one was talented in martial arts, they had no choice but to compromise. Why is it so rare to see an expert of the thunder-shocking realm around the age of 20 in the dark world? Many geniuses could reach the peak of the fire-flaming realm at this age, but they couldn't go any further. It wasn't that he couldn't, but that he didn't dare, because their physical strength had not reached the point where they could withstand the power of the thunder-shocking realm. Why is there almost no invincible realm experts under 30 in the dark world? The reason was the same. The bottleneck of physical strength was almost non-existent for Li Dongsheng. As long as he could grow up with his physical quality, it was possible for him to reach the invincible realm at the age of 20. Absolutely brilliant. This was a true super genius. More importantly, compared to Li Dongqing's inconceivable body, what was even more incomprehensible was his personality. Li Dongsheng was very quiet. Children who were just a few years old were usually prone to crying and throwing tantrums. However, Li Dongsheng rarely cried. In other words, he had almost never cried before. He drank milk quietly. He slept peacefully. He woke up quietly. He quietly grabbed the somewhat rough and unsightly small wooden sword and played with it until he fell asleep. When someone played with him, he would cooperate. When no one played with him, he would play by himself. Many people said that they had never seen such a well-behaved child. So well-behaved, with a kind of depression that was almost incomprehensible. Moreover, this child was also extremely sensitive to murderous intent and sword intent. But the way this sensitivity was expressed was not fear and rejection, but closeness and joy. So every time Lin Yuxian came back from the outside, he was very popular with Li Dongsheng with a murderous intent and sword intent that had not yet dissipated. The word daddy was also learned in this kind of meeting that was not very frequent. And all of this, whether it was his temperament or his body, seemed to prove that this 3-year-old child was destined to have a brilliant future on the path of martial arts that no one could look directly at. It was indeed difficult to see more things from a 3-year-old child. But just what could be seen was enough to make people sure of this point. Lin Yuxian watched quietly. Li Dongsheng held the small wooden sword in his hand and slashed the newly bought toy car, making a clanging sound. Tut, tut. Lin Yuxian sighed softly, touched Li Dongsheng's head, and whispered, "Good son, every time I see you, I can't wait to work harder. It is because I can see you every time that I have the motivation and courage to continue to go out." Li Dongsheng, who was playing with the small wooden sword in his hand, raised his head in confusion. Then he got up quickly, opened his hands, and trotted into Lin Yuxian's arms. Lin Yuxian snorted softly, but he laughed and kissed the little face in front of him, behind the adult and the child. Dongxing Yu, who was dressed like a little princess, quietly ate a piece of dessert. Her eyes were wide open. In her sight, a stream of blood was slowly flowing down Lin Yuxian's back, soaking his light-colored suit. "Master, Godfather." The 7-year-old boy trotted over and bowed seriously with a calm voice. Lin Fengding picked up the teacup and took a sip. He looked at the boy in front of him, and then looked at Lin Yuxian sitting next to him. He suddenly said, "This child calls me master and you godfather, making us look like peers. I am your father. Do you feel that you are taking advantage of me?" Lin Yuxian, who had been sitting on the sofa, sat up straight with some difficulty. He smiled and waved to the boy. "Dongsheng, come here." He pulled the boy over and hugged him. The boy's figure was a little thin, but he was very tall compared with his peers. He looked healthy and steady. It was not appropriate for him to sit on his lap like he did when he was a child. Lin Yuxian touched his head in a trance. He was a little embarrassed. "Dad, Tianlan and I, Huang Tu and I are brothers. His son calls me Godfather. It is natural for his son to call me Godfather. It was you who insisted on taking this apprentice from me. Otherwise, Dongxing would call you Grandpa now. Otherwise, Dongxing would have been better." Lin Fengting, who was in his 60s, did not look old, but most of his hair was white. He was more casual than a few years ago. He pointed at Li Dongxing and smiled. "Your godfather was also taught by me. You are my apprentice, so in the future, you can't call him Godfather in front of me. You have to call him Senior Brother, okay?" Li Dongchang smiled and did not speak. "You can't mess up the seniority. Godfather is Godfather." "Dad, you are not particular about this." Lin Fengting protested. "You are the only one who is particular." Lin Fengting rolled his eyes at his son angrily. "That's right. According to the current sequence in the family, we are of the same lineage. We are far from you." Lin Yuxian was proud. "Not far." Li Dongsheng shook his head. He looked at Lin Yuxian and whispered, "Godfather, you haven't been back for a long time." "Yes, The last time was more than a year ago. At that time, you were not so tall. Lin Yuxian touched his godson's head and suddenly smiled. This time, Godfather killed a noble outside. It was a mess. It seemed that he was a duke. He was also a figure in Europe. These years, he had been very unhappy with the royal family. Taking advantage of the cooperation between the two sides, I killed him. Good son, the royal family said that they would give you a princess as a daughter-in-law. She is 1 year older than you. I brought her photo here whether you want it or not. It doesn't matter if you don't want it. They have 3 princesses, all of whom are good-looking. The oldest one is 5 years older than you, but it doesn't matter. You can choose whatever you want. As long as you agree, the royal family will immediately send the princess here. She will be raised in our family and live with you. When she is of age, she will be your daughter-in-law. Li Dongsheng shook his head. Sister, you won't like it. Lin Fengting and Lin Yuxian were stunned at the same time. Ah, I was wondering. On the way back, Ye was not nice to me. She was so fierce. What's the matter? Lin Yuxian suddenly understood. Dongsheng Yu was 4 years older than Li Dongsheng. In the Lin clan, she was a veritable little princess. Many elders almost spoiled her. When she was 10 years old, she officially left the headquarters of the Lin clan and studied with Lin Yuxian. Of course, she did not learn to fight and kill. Now, Dongsheng Yu was involved in all the industries under Lin Yuxian's name. Countless top business elites were her teachers. Lin Yuxian obviously wanted to use incomparably huge resources to cultivate a business queen. Good son, you like your sister. Lin Yuxian joked. I want my sister to be my wife. Li Dongsheng said very seriously. A 7-year-old child naturally did not understand what a wife meant, but Lin Yuxian did not take this sentence as a joke. Instead, he said thoughtfully, It's not impossible, bastard. Lin Fengting scolded. Ye and Dongsheng are close relatives. They're cousins. What are you thinking about? That's nothing. Lin Yuxian shook his head. In the European land, there are countless cousins in the royal family, Rothschild, and other wealthy families. They say that they want to protect their noble bloodline. Generation after generation, no one has said anything. Not to mention them, in our Zhongzhou state, in ancient times, Fuxi and Yuhua were siblings. Aren't they? Lin Fengting grabbed a grape on the table and threw it over. Where's your fastidiousness? Go to rest. Lin Yuxian coughed dryly. His lips were abnormally pale. He patted Li Dongsheng on the shoulder and chuckled softly. It's okay if you don't want a princess. Anyway, you have nothing to lose. I brought you a gift from the European land this time. It is said that it is a sword used by a famous Grand Duke in history books. I will ask someone to send it to you later. Thank you, Godfather. Li Dongsheng bowed very seriously. Lin Yuxian waved his hand. Godfather, go to rest first. I will show you around when you are well. I will accompany you. Li Dongsheng said softly. Lin Yuxian was stunned. Li Dongsheng was very close to him when he was a child. Every time he came back, Li Dongsheng would accompany him when he wanted to rest. But in fact, he was taken away by Dongsheng Yu or the maid every time. Children were easy to coax, and Li Dongsheng was very obedient, so he never made trouble. Dongsheng, you haven't eaten yet, right? I will go first. Can you come to me later? Lin Yuxian chuckled softly. I have informed the kitchen. Dinner is early today. Godfather, wait for me for a few minutes. Li Dongsheng turned and looked in another direction. The two servants each carried a food box and walked into the garden in a hurry. Lin Yuxian glanced at Lin Fengting awkwardly, hoping that he could help him out. Lin Fengting was about to say something, but he found that Li Dongsheng was also looking at him. The child's eyes were very calm, without any emotion. Lin Fengting's mouth twitched. He sighed and said, Then let's go together. The young and beautiful maid put the food box on the table and took away the fruit plate. Li Dongsheng opened the food box obediently and took out the food inside. It was a large bowl of rice with a strange luster. The rice was the best rice, but it was mixed with a lot of materials with a kind of fragrance like medicinal herbs. There were 3 dishes and 1 soup, all of which were beautifully prepared. One dish was fried meat that was somewhat translucent 2 dishes of unknown green vegetables, and a bowl of very clear soup that exuded an alluring aroma. Li Dongsheng didn't greet Lin Yuxian and Lin Fengting. He ate alone in silence. He knew that his godfather didn't need to eat, and his master wouldn't eat these things either. He didn't dislike them, but he was afraid of wasting them. He once heard the people in the kitchen say in a very complicated tone that his young master, who was not surnamed Lin, was treated much better than any of the core members of the Lin clan. Not to mention other things, just the price of his meal could be compared to the annual expenses of an ordinary middle-class family in Europe. And he had 3 meals a day, almost all of which were set at a fixed time and had never missed a meal. Compared with the money he squandered crazily during his growth, resources were more important. Many of his food could hardly be seen on the market. Many of his things were even things that most people had never heard of. For some of them, the Lin clan had to trade or even rob them. Because of his existence, the Lin clan even specially formed a small army to do nothing else but to find suitable ingredients for his young master all over the world. Every bite of food he ate and even every drop of water he drank were unimaginable resources. The Lin clan had brought him back. In terms of training him, they had spared no expense. After eating these foods, they became the purest form of nutrition, transforming his body at every moment, making his body healthier, stronger, and more perfect. Such a seemingly simple meal. Even Lin Fengting would feel that it was a bit extravagant and a waste to eat it. But he ate it every day. Li Dongsheng ate seriously. He ate very seriously, as if he was facing a war. Lin Fengting smoked silently. Lin Yuxian, with a pale face, sat in a chair and watched Li Dongsheng eat. His eyes were soft and soothing, with an indescribable persistence. After the meal, Lin Yuxian took Li Dongsheng's hand and walked to the bedroom where he rested. Dongsheng, I'll tell you a secret, okay? Okay. In fact, I'm a weirdo who lives underground. I like quiet very much. Here, this is the password to enter the underground. You can also come up from below. If you don't like it, you can come up by yourself. Do you remember? I'm a heavy sleeper. I'm afraid I can't open the door for you. Okay. The elevator went down slowly. When the elevator door opened again, Li Dongsheng saw a very large bedroom that was occupied by countless large equipment and looked extremely crowded. The air was filled with a somewhat pungent smell of disinfectant. 2 medical elites of the Lin clan in white coats had just adjusted the instruments. When they saw Lin Yuxian come in with Li Dongsheng, they were slightly stunned and subconsciously said, "Mr. Lin, young master." Lin Yuxian nodded. However, Li Dongsheng did not respond. He just looked at everything around him silently. Lin Yuxian thought about it and said softly, "Well, you two work overtime and stay here with Dongsheng. Dongsheng wants to play here. After I fall asleep, if he wants to go up, you can take him up." His palm was pulled by someone. Lin Yuxian lowered his head and saw Li Dongsheng's extremely clear eyes. "Godfather, I remember the password and the way. I won't disturb you. I can go up to eat by myself. Then I'll come down and rest with you." Lin Yuxian hesitated for a moment and said with a smile, "Okay." He waved to the 2 medical elites in front of him. After they left the bedroom, Lin Yuxian, who had some cold sweat on his face, said with a smile, "Good son, I'll take you to see my big bed." The 2 of them held each other's hands and came to a metal can that was almost completely sealed. The iron can was oval in shape. It contained a part of the blue liquid with a hint of black, which was almost solidified. Lin Yuxian pressed a button. The liquid in the hibernation chamber began to boil and turned into large pieces of blue foam. "Is it beautiful?" Lin Yuxian asked with a smile. The air began to fill with the bitter smell of countless drugs combined together. It was even more unpleasant when mixed with the disinfectant. Li Dongsheng looked at the hibernation chamber in front of him and nodded seriously. "This is my big bed. I like to sleep in it the most." Lin Yuxian took a deep look at Li Dongsheng and said with a smile, "I'll go to rest. If you're bored, you can go up or ask someone to send some toys. Don't worry. I sleep deeply and won't wake up." "Okay." Li Dongsheng nodded. Lin Yuxian took off his clothes and opened the hibernation chamber. The moment he took off his clothes, a body full of bruises appeared in front of Li Dongqing. Chest, back, thighs, arms. On Lin Yuxian's body, there were countless wounds crisscrossing, which looked like a very ferocious and strange pattern. There were some new wounds. The moment the bandages were removed, blood flowed from the wounds. Lin Yuxian, who was pale, gritted his teeth, but there was a smile at the corner of his mouth. In this way, he looked like a rag doll that had been torn up at will and violently sewn together. Li Dongqing was neither afraid nor excited. He just stood there and watched silently. Lin Yuxian slowly lay down in the hibernation chamber. Countless bubbles drowned his body. The potion seeped in along the wounds. The pain began to spread all over his body. Lin Yuxian gritted his teeth and looked at Li Dongqing. He chuckled and said in a trembling voice, "Then I'll rest." "Okay." Li Dongqing quietly nodded his head. Lin Yuxian pressed a button and injected himself with a small amount of anesthetic. Then the hibernation chamber slowly closed. Countless bubbles with a bad smell covered him. The hibernation chamber made a soft sound. There seemed to be two worlds inside and outside the chamber. Only a 7-year-old child stood in front of the hibernation chamber and stood silently for a long time. His expression was as calm as ever, but his eyes were quietly red. "I promised your mother to give you a chance." In the somewhat dark study, Lin Fengting looked at the boy in front of him with soft eyes. In front of him was a small wooden sword and a few old but well-maintained notebooks. On the other side of these items, there was a jade pendant that was smooth and soft. The 12-year-old boy was already nearly 175 meters tall. His body proportions were amazing, and his face was beginning to change from that of a child to that of a teenager. It was as if he had inherited his mother's genes. His facial lines were extremely outstanding, and he already had a somewhat perfect appearance. He stared at the somewhat rough wooden sword and the notebooks that were basically stacked together. Lin Fengting also looked at him quietly. The wooden sword was left by Gu Xianyan. There were 3 in total. One was very small, one was very small, and the last one was the one in front of him. At that time, Gu Xianyan was already in a bad state of mind. She was even a little unconscious, but she still left her son a few toys that she made herself. Although the workmanship was poor, they were Li Dongqing's favorite when he was a child. "Dongqing, it may be a little early, but I still want to say that it's time to choose your future direction." On the sofa in the corner, Lin Yuxian said softly. Lin Fengting glanced at his son, shook his head, and patted the wooden sword and the notebook. He said softly, "Your biological parents are very great people. No, in the eyes of the dark world, your father can even be said to be the most great person in hundreds of years. He represents a glorious era that belongs only to him. Although it is very short, it is very brilliant. Here is everything about your parents. Some of it is recorded by me, some by your mother, and some by your father. It is very detailed. It is everything from the beginning to the end of that era. These can be given to you, or you can refuse." Lin Fengting smiled. "You are their biological son, but at the same time, Dongqing, you are also a child of the Lin clan." So, he gently patted the jade pendant beside him. "This is the token of the patriarch of the Lin clan. It is also another choice for you. If you choose this jade pendant, I will officially announce that from today on, Li Dongqing is the heir of the Lin clan. I am old. After me, you will be the patriarch of the Lin clan. The martial arts of the Lin clan, all the resources of the Lin clan, and all the information will be open to you. After I die, you will take my place to guard the countless branches of the Lin clan. When you have nothing to do, you can travel around the world. You will be as rich as a country, free and unrestrained, and live a carefree life. These are all yours." He gently patted the wooden sword beside him. "If you choose this, what you get is actually just a story, the story of your biological parents. But you'll also bear a lot of things, a lot of resentment, and a lot of hatred. These should be borne by you, but also should not be borne by you. Your future life will be completely different from now. I can't describe what kind of life it will be, but it will definitely be different from the life you choose this jade pendant for." Lin Fengting looked at Li Dongqing deeply. "Child, what do you choose?" Master, Godfather, Actually, in a somewhat dark environment, Li Dongqing quietly looked at the wooden sword in front of him and whispered, Actually, there's one thing you didn't tell me. What? Lin Fengding suddenly felt a little uneasy and worried. That is, Li Dongqing laughed. His eyes suddenly turned red. I shouldn't have been born in the first place. You didn't tell me that the reason why I was able to be born smoothly was because my mother killed my biological father with her own hands. Lin Fengding and Lin Yuxian trembled at the same time. The two stared at the young man with red eyes in front of them. Li Dongqing lowered his head slightly and murmured, I don't know why he laughed self-deprecatingly. Actually, I remember it all. I don't know why, but I really remember. I remember everything when I was a child. And I can feel that my mother seems to have really gone to a very, very far place. Chapter 1277. On the threshold where moonlight and light blended, the notebook turned the last page. The 16-year-old boy sat leaning against the door, looking up at the starlight in the night sky, lost in thought. The wooden sword and notebook lay beside him, making a soft sound when the wind blew. His master said it was a story, an extremely glorious era. It had been 4 years since he made the choice that night. He opened these notes for the first time tonight, not to accept the story. Instead, he wanted to finish the story in his memory. From a very young age, Li Dongsheng had the most basic thinking and memory. He remembered that his mother made him feel at ease and warm. He remembered that she gently stroked the fingers in front of his eyes. He remembered what she looked like. He remembered that she wore a red dress and put on exquisite makeup for him. He remembered that she was in a trance when she handed him and his sister over to his master. He remembered the helplessness when his sister left all the best food she could find for him in the garbage dump. He remembered the complicated look in his master's eyes when he looked at him. He remembered his godfather's doting and his serious injuries and exhaustion every time he came back. He remembered that someone had talked about Lin in Zhongzhou State, Dongsheng Clan, and Dongwang. He also remembered the stories his mother told him when he was born. Those stories became dreams as he grew up. In the dream, he was illusory. He looked at his father, who was a little vague when he was young, and his mother, who was very clear. He felt their sadness, joy, and resentment. In the dream, they met and died. Countless emotions surged in the depths of his heart since he was a child. He didn't know what to say, so most of the time, he was silent. Under the moonlight, with each page of the notebook turned, the image of his parents in his memory seemed to become more and more three-dimensional and clear. It was like a young couple with peerless beauty was standing on his left and right side. The joys and sorrows of separation and reunion came to him. Li Dongsheng reached out and gently touched the wooden sword beside him, feeling the cool touch from the sword, and he became quieter and quieter. Light footsteps could be heard. Under the moonlight, Lin Fengting, whose hair was all white and wore a loose tang suit, slowly walked over, carrying a jar of good huadiao wine in his hand. Li Dongsheng looked up at him and whispered, Master, I know you're in a bad mood. Do you want a drink? Lin Fengding lifted the wine jar in his hand. Shall we ask the kitchen to make a few dishes to go with the wine? Li Dongsheng glanced at the wine pot and shook his head. Tea. In the hall, the two maids responsible for taking care of Li Dongsheng looked at each other and turned to make tea. Lin Fengding did not care about anything and directly sat down beside Li Dongsheng. There was a wooden sword between them. The cold moonlight shone on the courtyard garden, and the sky was hazy and blurry. The tea was served. Li Dongsheng took the teacup and took a sip. The tea was strong and bitter. Lin Fengting glanced at him. Did you read the notes? Yes. Is there nothing you want to say to me? Yes. Have you ever regretted it? I mean, the choice back then. A few years ago, if you had chosen that jade pendant, you would be the young patriarch of the Lin clan now. You wouldn't have to consider anything, just like me. You could do whatever you want, and you wouldn't have to shoulder anything. Isn't that good? And now, a story let you carry a lot of things? Is it worth it? Yes. I like you. As a son, You have to do something for your parents, right? Yes. Want to avenge them? Yes. Are you confident? Yes. In the indescribable depression, Lin Fengding took a deep look at his disciple. He took the wine jar, took 2 cups, and filled them with wine. Li Dongsheng did not move, but gently touched the wooden sword in his hand. The divine list has a new ranking. Lin Fengding picked up the wine glass and whispered, Emperor Huawu has reached the top of the divine list and ranks first. He took a sip of wine and laughed at himself. It's true that the Li family is good at making arrangements. The path of Emperor Huawu is similar to that of the ancestors of our Lin clan. When Li Quantu pulled out his dragon vein from him, Senior Li should have nodded. Huawu had half of the vitality of the dragon vein of Zhongzhou state and entered the peak of the invincible realm. From then on, they should have had a plan. After your father died, the dragon veins attracted each other, and Emperor Huawu filled up his own dragon vein. These years, he has completely recovered from the injury in his body, successfully broke through the peak of the invincible realm, and entered a new realm. At present, his realm is not as good as that of your father and Wang Tianzong. But now, he is the only one in this realm, so in this era, he can almost be called the chosen one. Today's Li family is really invincible in the world. He drank up the glass of wine. Lin Fengding sighed softly, feeling a little emotional. Li Dongsheng slowly reached out, picked up the teacup, and took another sip of tea. After a long while, he nodded. Yes. The soft light of the crystal chandelier filled every corner of the hall of the ancient castle. 2 rows of medieval-style armors were neatly arranged in the hall. The huge screen was playing the news of East Island's Emperor Huawu's official visit to Italos. In front of the tea table, which was carved with complex patterns and could be called a work of art, a middle-aged man in his 40s, who was full of vigor, picked up the glass and said softly, Brother, I'd like to propose a toast to you. Lin Yuxian picked up the glass, clinked it with him, and drank up the wine in the glass. The Lin clan has developed well in recent years. The middle-aged man, who had an ordinary appearance but an extraordinary aura, smiled and said, Brother, your branch in particular has developed a little frighteningly in the past few years. You're blossoming everywhere. You can even say that you're a superpower now. Lin Yuxian held the glass and looked at him with a faint smile. Why do you want it? Brother, what are you talking about? The middle-aged man shook his head. I'm greedy, but I won't rob the elders of the Lin clan. What I want to say is that Big Brother and I are a family, and we don't have to be separated. When we develop together, there's no need to worry about anything. Big Brother, we're doing well in Europe and Africa, but I haven't seen your flag in my territory. If you're interested, how about I invite you to develop in East Island of Zhongzhou State? The subcontinent is big, but I think I'm important enough. To be honest, there are not many people who don't respect me. Brother, if you come in, no one dares to say anything. Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and said blandly, The subcontinent is really big, but the market has long been saturated. How can I get involved? If you want to, of course there is. The middle-aged man said seriously, If the Lin clan's industry wants to come in, I will naturally fully support it. If you want to get involved in many fields in Zhongzhou State, the parliament will be more than happy. Even if you think it's troublesome, it doesn't matter. I have a good relationship with the royal family of Semitic, so you can get in directly. It doesn't matter even if you have to take my share. Our families have been friends for so many years. It's too boring to care about interests. Lin Yuxian glanced at him and seemed to be a little surprised. The Semitic people had an extraordinary position in the world because they controlled the energy, oil. Semitic also had the largest oil reserves in the world. If Lin Yuxian got involved, the benefits he would get would make even the super forces crazy with jealousy. At present, most of the benefits in this area were controlled by the good brother in front of him. Lin Yuxian suddenly laughed. You know better than me that the things in my hands don't belong to the Lin clan. I'm not even a branch of the Lin clan now. If you want to cooperate, you can talk to the Lin clan. But it doesn't feel right to talk to me, a person who has no status in the Lin clan. Everything in my hands has nothing to do with the Lin clan. As for myself, he shook his head. The oil in the subcontinent is too rich. I'm afraid I'll have indigestion. The middle-aged man was silent for a long time. When it was quiet, his silence showed that he was in a somewhat sluggish state. His entire person carried an indescribable feeling of emptiness. Lin Yuxian remained calm, drinking and eating in silence. I don't regard you as an outsider. Why do you keep me 1,000 miles away? Do you know how much information about you have been squeezed out from me over the years? You and I have had several conflicts, but I have suppressed them and tolerated you everywhere. Because I have always felt that you and I are a real family. Uncle Lin is also here. If I reach out everywhere, it means that I'm not sensible, impolite, and disrespectful to the elders. I don't regard you and the Lin clan as outsiders. You treat me like this, which makes me feel a little wronged. Lin Yuxian shook his head and said flatly, I have nothing to do with the Lin clan. In life, many things can be changed, and many relationships can be changed. But how can bloodline be changed? You are the heir of the Lin clan. In my eyes, everything you have naturally belongs to the Lin clan. The middle-aged man looked at Lin Yuxian with burning eyes. Bloodline, this has always been the obsession of your family. I can't agree with it. There was a little ridicule in Lin Yuxian's tone. The middle-aged man drank a glass of wine and said in a low voice, If you are not satisfied with Submit, you can make any other requests. As long as you say it, I will agree to all of them. He thought that Lin Yuxian was advancing by retreating and wanted to increase the price. Lin Yuxian took a deep look at him and suddenly said, Why don't you tell me what you want? I want to ask you for a person. The middle-aged man spoke bluntly. Lin Yuxian's pupils shrank suddenly. The silence formed a stalemate. The surrounding atmosphere became dignified and austere invisibly. I thought you wanted two. Lin Yuxian sneered. One is enough. The middle-aged man whispered, Cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. If he doesn't die, I can't feel at ease. There is nothing to talk about. Lin Yuxian shook his head. I can't afford what you want. Your Majesty, you don't have to call me brother. I can't afford this title either. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes, and his voice was still calm with almost full sincerity. Why are you so straightforward, brother? I come here sincerely this time, and don't say any more. Lin Yuxian's voice was calm. If you continue, I will see you out. The middle-aged man's voice stopped. The lingering sound of his unfinished words suddenly became incomparably hoarse. Lin Yuxian lowered his head to eat and said calmly, Have a safe trip. I won't see you out. Huh? The middle-aged man stood up. The bright yellow dragon robe, the 12 movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars of East Island. As the middle-aged man got up, he appeared in the hall in a complicated and gorgeous costume. Lin Yuxian did not raise his head. I'm kind and sincere. Why are you so heartless, brother? The Li family and the Lin clan have been friends for hundreds of years. You and I are one family. Everything in the past is still vivid in my mind. Brother, do you really have the heart to see us become enemies because of a bastard? His voice was still calm, but a strong sense of majesty and oppression arose spontaneously between the lines. Lin Yuxian slowly raised his head and looked at the man in front of him. He was the current patriarch of the Li family, the leader of the dark world of Zhongzhou State, the dominator of the purgatory of Heaven Capital, the first on the world divine list, the celestial emperor of East Island, and the supreme will of the subcontinent. Since his sister-in-law died in Beihai more than a decade ago, there was no one in the dark world who could balance him. With the strength at the peak of the invincible realm, he returned to East Island with the purgatory of Heaven Capital, which had suffered heavy losses. The subcontinent had been full of turbulence and bloodshed for many years. Gaoshan, Annan, Hung State, the will of the celestial emperor of Huawu wreaked havoc in the subcontinent. Then Zhongzhou State. Then Beihai, which had not yet recovered. For more than a decade, the dark world of the subcontinent had not been completely unified, but the purgatory of Heaven Capital and the Li family had suppressed all the resistance. Now they were slowly digesting the fruits of victory. In 10 years, at most 20 years, if everything went well, the Li family and the purgatory of Heaven Capital would become the only dynasty in the subcontinent. The Wang family of Beihai and the super-wealthy families would die slowly under the soft knife of the purgatory of heaven capital. And they didn't even have the slightest way to resist. The celestial emperor of Huowu, who had established the general situation of the subcontinent not long ago, did not stop. Instead, he took advantage of his ascension to the first on the divine list to officially expand. The European land was their first stop. The celestial emperor of Huowu officially visited Talos. 2 days later, he would officially visit the Holy Land and meet the old man. The Holy Land and the purgatory of heaven capital were deeply cooperating. In today's European land, the Shadow Throne, Rothschild, the wealthy families, and the Dark Knights were all facing a formidable enemy. Similarly, Lin Yuxian was also facing a formidable enemy. The whole dark world was a little uneasy, because in this era, there was really no one who could stop the celestial emperor of Huowu. How good it would have been if you had done this earlier. Lin Yuxian said blandly, "Brother, you are uncomfortable, and so am I. In my eyes, you're the most normal person. I'm being sincere." The celestial emperor of Huowu shook his head slightly. "In my heart, the Lin clan is really not an outsider, neither is my brother. Why one is that bastard? He is 16 this year, right? I don't want to wait anymore. What do you and the Lin clan want? Just say it. As long as I have it, I can give it to you. But you have to give that bastard to me." "Are you going to kill him?" Lin Yuxian's voice was cold. "Kill my adopted son?" "Not kill." The celestial emperor of Huowu shook his head. "Not just kill. That crazy woman killed my father. After that, I couldn't even find my father's bones. I could only set up a cenotaph. I'll take that bastard back and tear every part of him in front of my father's cenotaph bit by bit. I'll let him die slowly and hope that his screams will be louder at that time. I also hope that the crazy bitch hasn't gone far and can listen to his son's screams. I'll let him know that he and Li Tianlan are completely cut off and have no descendants." Lin Yuxian said word by word, "That's my adopted son." So, the surrounding temperature continued to drop. The celestial emperor of Huowu's voice became gloomy. "Brother, are you going to stop me from killing that bastard?" Lin Yuxian did not speak. The celestial emperor of Huowu continued, "Can you stop me? After I cooperate with the Holy Land, who can stop me? The badly damaged Rothschild? The Shadow Throne that is in disarray? The Dark Knights? Who do they think they are?" He did not go on, but Lin Yuxian understood what he meant. The Shadow Throne of Rothschild was nothing. Most of his roots were in the European continent. In the eyes of the celestial emperor of Huowu, he was naturally nothing. "You can try," Lin Yuxian said lightly. "Brother, you're no match for me. I don't want to fight with the Lin clan. The Lin clan has been with the Li family for hundreds of years. The Lin clan can ignore a bastard, but I still care." Lin Yuxian just sneered. No one would believe this kind of nonsense to deceive a child. His style of doing things for so many years had clearly shown that he would not let go of the Lin clan. He dared to give so much to the Lin clan because he was confident that he could swallow the entire Lin clan in the future. In this case, what did it matter if he gave more? "Brother, you seem to be dissatisfied with my Li family. You know very well how your Li family rose to the top." Lin Yuxian said lightly. "Do you mean the Dongxing clan in those days?" The celestial emperor of Huowu said softly, "I know that, and I plan to compensate them." "Compensate?" Lin Yuxian mocked. "If I remember correctly, you want to kill the only descendant of the Dongxing clan, right? Who said he is the only one?" The celestial emperor of Huowu said lightly, "When I came to Dalos, I saw the CEO who studied with you. She was a very young beauty with a slim figure and an elegant manner. She was very good. What do you want?" Lin Yuxian's face suddenly changed. "I will take her away and accept her." The celestial emperor of Huowu said lightly, "I want her to give birth to a son for me. In the future, let me and her son inherit the Li family. How about that?" Lin Yuxian suddenly stood up and rushed to the door without saying a word. "Brother, you are impulsive." The voice of the celestial emperor of Huowu floated. Lin Yuxian suddenly turned back. In his line of sight, an incomparably brilliant sword light suddenly lit up. "Sister, Godfather," the The slender teenager rushed into Lin Yoxian's exclusive bedroom in the underground. In some crowded space, countless mechanical equipment was working hard, making a buzzing sound. Dong Xingyu, who wore a long white dress and had long hair, sat on a chair in a daze. Her big eyes were red and swollen, as if she had just cried. Seeing the teenager rush in, she forced a smile and whispered, "Dongcheng." Godfather went in. Li Dongcheng held his sister's cold palm, skillfully operated the medical equipment on the side, and transferred the situation in a hibernation chamber. A somewhat illusory figure appeared on the screen. Countless body data flashed beside the illusory figure. Li Dongcheng did not look at the data. His eyes were fixed on the humanoid illusory figure representing his godfather on the screen. The illusory figure shook slightly. In his sight, Li Dongcheng could clearly see that the illusory figure representing his godfather was missing an arm. The celestial emperor of Huawu came to the European continent. Lin Fengting's figure came over. The corner of Li Dongcheng's mouth moved, and he whispered, "Godfather, the injury is very serious." Lin Fengting whispered, "The loss of an arm has some impact on his strength, but it's worth it. The other party wanted to take Ye. If Yuxian didn't fight desperately, neither of them would come back this time. Now, at least he came back. It's good that he came back. Take my sister?" Li Dongqing's voice was in a trance. "An old cow eats young grass. He wants Ye to give him a son to inherit the Li family." "Ha!" Lin Fengting laughed. "But don't worry. Ye will stay at home in the future. I'm not dead yet. No matter how crazy Huawu is, he won't behave atrociously here." Li Dongcheng was completely silent. Even his sound of breathing was completely restrained. He stared deeply at the illusory figure with one arm missing on the screen. Endless depression continued to spread with him as the center. "Do you still want revenge?" Lin Fengting asked. "Yes." It was a simple answer, plain and light. "Do you know what you're going to face?" Lin Fengting's voice was gentle. "He's the strongest person in this world and this era. He's really invincible and also the strongest superpower in this era. It's not easy to take revenge. It's really not easy." "Yes. What are you going to do?" There was silence. After a long silence, Li Dongqing looked at his godfather, who was sleeping in a hibernation cabin. "Master." "Yes. I want to go out for a walk." Li Dongqing's voice was soft. "Look at the world and see how invincible it is." "Okay." Lin Fengting nodded. "When you officially enter the Qi-controlling realm, you can go out and have a look." "Yes." 16 years old. Qi-controlling realm. Li Dongcheng, who had no bottlenecks in his body and will, began to formally contact martial arts at the age of 12. His foundation was unimaginably solid. But in the past 4 years, he didn't even enter the Qi-controlling realm, the most basic of the 4 realms of martial arts. It didn't make sense at all. Lin Fengting didn't know what was going on. "Is the Qi-controlling realm enough?" Li Dongqing asked. Lin Fengting didn't answer but asked, "Do you know what your godfather's been doing all these years?" Li Dongqing shook his head. "He is taking care of some of the properties left by your parents." Lin Fengting said slowly, "When they were alive, that was their era. After your father died, Emperor Dong's palace fell apart, and the remaining properties were less than 1/10. What your godfather has done these years is to gather up some of the things that were barely left. After so many years of development, what he has now, although is less than 1/10 of what Emperor Dong's palace used to be, it could be regarded as a relatively objective foundation. And this foundation was originally taken care of by him on behalf of your parents, and he wanted to hand it over to you. This time, when the Emperor of Huawu comes to the European continent, your foundation will probably shrink a lot, but there are still a few people left by your parents, and there is no doubt that they are loyal. I will give you their contact information. If you want to go out, they should be able to protect your safety as long as the Emperor of Huawu doesn't take action personally. But you also have to give them hope. A 16-year-old in the Qi-controlling realm, in the outside world, people who don't know the secret of your body will not be too disappointed. But if you leave the Lin clan and haven't officially stepped into the 4 realms of martial arts, what do you think they will think?" Li Dongqing was silent for a long time before he whispered, The hope I give them should not be so cheap. Lin Fengting glanced at him. Li Dongcheng slowly reached out his hand. An extremely condensed sword energy slowly formed at his fingertips. The sword energy twisted and shone in his hand. In a narrow space, there was a sudden burst of ear-piercing explosions. Li Dongqing's aura began to rise sharply. The sword energy began to contain a storm. The storm changed and instantly turned into frost. The frost began to burn fiercely in the silence. The fire was extremely dazzling. The thunder roared. The electric arc flashed. Li Dongqing's aura instantly reached the peak. That deep blue electric arc danced in his hand, incomparably enchanting. In an instant, Li Dongqing went straight into the half-step invincible realm. He looked at Lin Fengting and whispered, "This should be enough." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.